Hello, everyone, and welcome back to X-Ranger. Before we begin, I thought it would be interesting if each of you could leave a comment indicating which part of the world you're joining us from. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. Now let's get comfortable, relax, and start our program. Okay, so I've been sitting on this for a while, and I don't really know where else to put it. I guess I just need to get it out there because it's been eating at me for months now. My wife and I still don't talk about it much, but when we do, it's always in this hushed, almost guilty way, like we witnessed something we weren't supposed to. This happened last summer on one of those perfect Oregon days where the sky is so blue it almost hurts to look at, and the air smells like salt and pine. We live over on the coast, and we decided to take the Vespa out for a ride. Just a lazy Sunday kind of thing. No real plans, just enjoying being together. We'd packed a light lunch, some water, and hopped on the scooter around mid-morning. The Vespa's not exactly built for rough terrain, but the roads around Fairview Mountain are paved and winding, perfect for a slow cruise. I was driving, and my wife was on the back, her arms wrapped around my waist, her chin resting on my shoulder sometimes so she could point things out. We've been married for 8 years, and moments like that are why I love our little adventures. Just us, the hum of the engine, and the world rolling by. As we got closer to Fairview Mountain, the road started to climb, and the trees thickened up on either side. We'd been up there before. It's a popular spot for tourists because of the viewpoints. But we like to go on weekdays or early to avoid the crowds. That day it was pretty quiet. We passed a couple of cars, but mostly it was just us and the forest. The sun was warm on my arms, and I could feel the breeze cutting through my jacket. My wife was laughing about something. I think she'd spotted a deer off in the trees, and I remember feeling so content, like nothing could go wrong. We reached the top of one of the hills and started coasting downhill toward one of the clear-cut areas. If you've never been out there, clear-cuts are these big patches where they've logged the trees, so it's just stumps and brush and new growth, with the forest looming around the edges. It's kind of eerie in a way, like a scar on the landscape. But from up high, you can see for miles. We were slowing down to take in the view, the engine barely ticking over, and that's when it happened. I saw movement out of the corner of my eye, down in the clear-cut. At first I thought it was a bear, or maybe a large deer. We get those around here all the time. But then this thing stood up. I mean, it rose from the ground like it had been crouching, and it was huge. My breath caught in my throat, and I instinctively squeezed the brakes, bringing the Vespa to a stop right there on the shoulder. My wife tightened her grip on me, and I heard her gasp. "What is that?" she whispered, her voice shaky. I couldn't answer. I just stared. This creature was brown, like dark matted fur, and it had to be at least 8 feet tall. I'm 6 feet myself, and this thing towered over everything around it. It didn't move like an animal, though. It had this human-like gait, like it was walking on 2 legs, but with a slight sway, almost deliberate. It was maybe 100 yards away near the tree line, and it started walking parallel to the road, not rushing, just strolling. The sun was hitting it from behind, casting this long shadow that made it seem even bigger. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears. I've never been so scared and fascinated at the same time. It glanced over at us. I swear, it turned its head and looked right in our direction. I couldn't see its eyes clearly from that distance, but I felt this chill, like it was acknowledging us. Not aggressive, just aware. My wife was trembling against my back, and she kept saying, "Let's go, please, let's just go." But I was frozen, my hands gripping the handlebars so tight my knuckles hurt. The creature kept walking along the tree line for what felt like forever, but was probably only 30 seconds or so. Then, without any hurry, it stepped into the forest and disappeared. Just like that, it was gone, swallowed up by the trees. The whole thing was so quiet, no sound from it, no crashing through the brush, nothing. The only noise was the wind and my own ragged breathing. For a minute, we just sat there, not saying anything. My wife's grip loosened, and she buried her face in my shoulder. I could feel her shaking. "Did that really happen?" she mumbled into my jacket. I nodded, still staring at the spot where it had vanished. My mind was racing. What was that? A bear? No, bears don't walk like that, and they're not that tall. Bigfoot, I'd heard stories, but I always thought they were just campfire tales. Now I wasn't so sure. We eventually started the Vespa back up and drove a little further down the road to a pull-off spot. We got off the scooter, and my legs felt like jelly. I leaned against the seat, trying to calm down. My wife was pale, her eyes wide. "We need to leave," she said, her voice firm now. But I couldn't just walk away. I had to know more. "Let's go back and look," I said, but she shook her head hard. "No, it's not safe. What if it's still there?" I argued that it was gone, and we might never get another chance. This was a once-in-a-lifetime thing. But she was adamant. She refused to go anywhere near that clear-cut again. I could see the fear in her eyes, real, raw fear, and I didn't want to push her. So we compromised. We'd wait a bit, then I'd go check it out alone while she stayed with the Vespa. We sat there for what felt like an hour, though it was probably only 20 minutes. The sun was higher now, and the day had lost its warmth for me. All I could think about was that creature. Eventually, I convinced my wife to let me go back on foot. I promised I wouldn't go too far, just to the edge of the clear-cut. She agreed, but she stayed by the scooter, arms crossed, watching me like a hawk. I walked back up the road, my heart still thumping. The air felt heavier now, and every little sound, a bird chirping, a branch cracking, made me jump. When I reached the spot where we'd stopped, I looked down into the clear-cut. It was quiet, just stumps and tall grass swaying in the breeze. Then I remembered something. As the creature had walked, it passed behind a large stump. From where we were, it had looked like the stump was about chest high on it, which meant the stump had to be huge. I scrambled down the embankment, my boots slipping on the loose dirt. The grass was waist-high in places, and it was damp from morning dew. I made my way over to where I'd seen it, and that's when I found the stump. It was a massive thing, weathered and grey. I stood next to it, and I'm 6 feet tall, but the top of the stump came up to my chin. I pulled out my phone. No service out there, but I used the measuring app I have. It measured 6.5 feet tall, 6.5 feet, and this thing had passed behind it like it was nothing. If the stump was 6.5 feet and the creature was taller than it, then it had to be at least 8 feet tall, just like I'd thought. My stomach dropped. That confirmation made it all real in a way that seeing it hadn't. I started looking around the area, and that's when I saw the matted grass. In a patch near the tree line, the grass was flattened down like something heavy had been lying there. It was in a rough oval shape, about 7 feet long, and the stems were broken and pressed into the ground. My skin crawled. This was where it had been crouching before it stood up. I could almost picture it there, waiting, watching. I knelt down and ran my hand over the grass. It felt damp and crushed, and there was a faint, musky smell, like wet dog but stronger. Then I saw the tracks. They were huge, easily twice the size of my boot, and they led from the matted grass toward the trees. The prints were deep, sunk into the soft earth, and they had a human-like shape, but wider with what looked like 5 toes. I didn't have anything to measure them with, but I placed my boot next to one. My boot is size 11, and the track was at least 18 inches long. I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. This wasn't a bear. Bear tracks are different, more rounded. These looked almost like human feet, but massive. I followed the tracks for a few yards, but they disappeared into the thicker undergrowth near the forest edge. I didn't dare go further. The trees were dense, and it was dark in there, like a wall of shadows. I stood there for a minute, just listening. The forest was silent. No birds, no insects, nothing. It was like everything had gone quiet when that thing stepped in. I felt this overwhelming sense of being watched, and I hurried back to the matted grass area. I took a few photos with my phone, but I knew they wouldn't do it justice. The light was fading a bit as clouds rolled in, and the whole place felt oppressive. I thought about calling out, but what would I say? And what if it answered? My wife was right. This was dangerous. I should have listened to her sooner. If we'd come down here right after we saw it, maybe we could have seen more, gotten better evidence. But now it was too late. I made my way back up to the road, my legs shaking. My wife was still by the Vespa, and she rushed over when she saw me. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice tight. I nodded, but I could tell she didn't believe me. I showed her the photos, and her face went even paler. "We need to go home," she said, and this time I didn't argue. We rode back in silence. The wind felt colder now, and every shadow in the trees seemed to move. I kept glancing in the mirrors, half expecting to see something following us. When we got home, we didn't talk about it much. We just went inside and locked the door, like we were trying to shut out what we'd seen. Over the next few days, I did some research online, reading about other sightings in Oregon, and it fit. The height, the gait, the way it disappeared. But knowing that didn't make it any less terrifying. The thing that haunts me the most is the missed opportunity. If my wife hadn't been so scared, if we'd gone down there right away, maybe we could have seen more, maybe we could have found clearer tracks or even seen it again. But she was terrified, and I don't blame her. I was too. That fear is what kept us from acting, and now it's just this memory that hangs over us. We've never seen anything like it since, and I doubt we ever will. But sometimes, when I'm out in the woods or even just driving, I'll catch a movement in the corner of my eye and my heart will skip a beat. I'll never forget that day, the way it stood up, the way it looked at us, and the silence that followed. It's like a ghost in my mind, and I don't think it'll ever go away. Story 2. It was the 28th of November, 2008. I remember the date because it was the day after Thanksgiving, and I was still stuffed from dinner. I was staying at my friend's place out in Lacey Springs, Alabama. It's one of those areas where the town just sort of gives up and the woods take over. His house was at the end of a long gravel road, surrounded by pines so thick you couldn't see 10 feet into them, even in the middle of the day. I'd gone to bed late, maybe around 1 in the morning, after staying up watching old movies. The guest room was at the back of the house, with a window that looked out into a wall of darkness. I remember thinking, just before I fell asleep, how absolute that darkness was. No streetlights, no neighbors' porch lights, just nothing. I woke up because I had to pee. It was that kind of urgent middle-of-the-night need that pulls you straight out of a dream. The digital clock on the nightstand glowed red. 4:07 in the morning. The house was silent, but not a comfortable silence. It was the kind of silence that feels heavy, like it's pressing down on you. I swung my legs out of bed, the old wooden floorboards cold under my bare feet, and shuffled out into the hallway. The bathroom was just across the hall. I did my business, the flush sounding obnoxiously loud in the quiet. I was washing my hands when I heard it. At first, I thought it was the wind. The house had one of those big old heating units that hummed constantly, a low drone that was just background noise. But this was different. It was a sound under the hum, a vibration that I felt in my chest before I really heard it with my ears. I turned off the faucet and stood there, dripping hands over the sink, not moving a muscle. It came again, a howl, but not a dog, not a coyote. I've heard coyotes. This was deeper, more powerful. It wasn't a screech or a yelp. It was a long, drawn-out vocalization that seemed to start low, rumble up into a higher pitch, and then drop back down into a guttural growl. It sounded like it had weight to it, Like the sound itself was a physical thing pushing through the trees. It reminded me straight away of those Bigfoot recordings you sometimes hear on those late-night paranormal shows. The ones that always give you a chill, even when you're safe on your couch. But this wasn't through a TV speaker. This was outside the window. My heart was suddenly hammering against my ribs, a frantic, panicked rhythm. I remember my mouth went completely dry. I tiptoed out of the bathroom and back into the guest room, pressing myself against the wall next to the window. I didn't want to look out. I was afraid of what I might see looking back in. I just listened. The howl came a third time, longer this time, and it felt closer. It was followed by another, slightly different one from a different direction, a response. There was more than one. A cold dread, the kind that has nothing to do with the temperature, started seeping into my bones. This wasn't just an animal. This was something else. The sounds were too complex, too deliberate. They felt intelligent. A stupid part of my brain, the part that's always trying to rationalize fear, told me I should get a better listen. Maybe it was just a weird owl, or a feral hog, or my mind playing tricks. I knew it wasn't. But I had to know for sure. I had to prove to myself that I was just being a scared kid in a dark house. I crept out of the room and down the hallway to the back door. The kitchen floor was icy cold. I unlocked the deadbolt, the click echoing in the stillness, and slowly pulled the door open. The cold night air hit me like a slap. I stepped out onto the wooden back deck. The boards were rough and freezing under my bare feet. The wind was blowing, making the pine trees sway and whisper. And then, just like that, the howling stopped. It didn't fade away, it just ceased. One moment the night was filled with that terrifying, unnatural noise, and the next, there was nothing. Just the wind and the hum of the heating unit, and the very, very distant sound of a dog barking a few properties over. The silence was worse, so much worse. Before, the sounds were scary, but they were a known quantity. They were out there. This new silence felt like a trap. It felt like whatever was making those sounds was now listening, just like I was. It knew I was here. I stood on that deck for what felt like an hour, but was probably only a minute or two. My whole body trembling, my ears straining for any little crack of a twig or rustle of leaves. Nothing. The woods were a black void, utterly still. I felt exposed, completely and totally exposed. The porch light was off, but I felt like I was standing on a stage under a spotlight. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to get back inside, to lock the door, to hide. So I did. I backed up slowly, not wanting to turn my back on the woods, until my hand found the doorframe. I slipped inside, locked the deadbolt, and slid the chain across for good measure. I stood there in the dark kitchen, my back against the door, trying to slow my breathing. I went back to bed, but I didn't get under the covers. I just sat on the edge of the mattress, pulling the blanket around my shoulders. I was shivering, and not just from the cold. I kept my eyes fixed on the dark square of the window. My mind was racing, trying to find a logical explanation, and coming up empty. A bear? Alabama has black bears, but their sounds aren't like that. A person playing a prank? At 4 in the morning, miles from anyone else? It made no sense. I must have sat there for 20 minutes, just staring into the darkness, my ears ringing with the silence. The fear was starting to recede, just a little, replaced by a shaky exhaustion. Maybe it was over. Maybe whatever it was had moved on. I started to lie back down, thinking I should at least try to get some sleep before the sun came up. That's when it started again. It wasn't just one howl this time. It was a chorus. A series of those deep, powerful roars and howls, all overlapping, coming from what sounded like 3 or 4 different spots in the woods, all converging on the house. The volume was staggering. It was so loud that the humming of the heating unit was completely drowned out. The windows in my room actually vibrated in their frames. I could feel the sound in my teeth. I froze, halfway to lying down, my body locked in a crouch. This was different from before. This was aggressive. It felt like a challenge, a declaration. I wasn't just hearing something strange anymore. I was being hunted. The raw, primal terror that flooded my system is something I can't even properly describe. It was a cold, sharp certainty that I was in mortal danger. This wasn't a fear of the unknown. It was the knowledge that something known, something powerful and intelligent and very, very angry, was right outside. And then the dogs started. Every single dog in the neighborhood, probably for a mile around, erupted at once. It wasn't their normal barking. It was a frenzied, panicked, high-pitched yelping and howling. They were terrified. I could hear my friend's dog, a big Labrador who was usually pretty chill, going absolutely berserk downstairs, barking and scratching at the back door. That sound, the cacophony of the unknown things in the woods and the terrified response from every domestic animal for miles, is something that will be burned into my brain forever. I didn't move. I couldn't. I was paralyzed, curled into a ball on top of the bedsheets, clutching the blanket to my chest like a shield. My heart was beating so fast and so hard, I thought I was going to have a heart attack. I was gasping for air, but my lungs wouldn't fill. I was completely unarmed. There was nothing in that room I could use to defend myself. Not a knife, not a baseball bat, nothing. I was a sitting duck. The howling lasted for 3 minutes. I know, because I was staring at the red numbers on the clock, watching the seconds tick by, each one an eternity. The sounds would rise to a deafening crescendo, then fall to a lower, guttural series of grunts and rumbles, then swell up again. It felt like they were circling the house. I kept waiting for a crash, for the sound of breaking glass, for something to try and get in. But nothing did. After what the clock told me was exactly 3 minutes, the howling stopped as abruptly as it had begun. The sudden silence was, once again, a physical shock. The dogs kept barking for another minute or so, their barks becoming more sporadic and confused, before they too fell silent. The rest of the night was the longest of my life. I didn't sleep. I didn't even close my eyes. I sat propped up against the headboard, staring at the window, watching the absolute blackness outside slowly, imperceptibly, begin to soften into a deep, pre-dawn grey. Every tiny sound, the house settling, the refrigerator kicking on, the wind, made me jump. My muscles were so tense they ached. When the sun finally started to come up, casting a weak grey light into the room, the fear began to loosen its grip, just a little. The rational part of my brain started to reassert itself. I got out of bed, my legs stiff and shaky, and went to the window. In the daylight, the woods looked normal, just trees. There was no sign of anything unusual, no giant footprints in the frost-covered grass, no broken branches, nothing. I went downstairs. My friend was already in the kitchen making coffee. He looked tired. "You hear all that racket last night?" he asked without turning around. "Yeah," I said, my voice hoarse. "What was it?" He shrugged, pouring water into the coffee maker. "Dunno, coyotes, maybe." Sounded weird, though. Never heard 'em like that before. Woke me up out of a dead sleep. Duke was going crazy. He gestured with his head toward the back door, where the lab was now sleeping peacefully on his bed. I just nodded. I didn't tell him what I really thought. I didn't tell him about the howls that sounded like recordings I'd heard, about the intelligence I felt behind them, about the pure animal terror that had frozen me solid. I just drank the coffee he gave me and stared out the back window at the peaceful, sun-dappled woods. We never talked about it again. I left later that day, but I've never forgotten it. Not for a single day. It's been years, but the memory of that sound, of that feeling of being prey, is as vivid as if it happened yesterday. I've read stories online, accounts from other people who've heard similar things in the woods, and it's always the same. That specific, deep, modulated howl that doesn't match any known animal. I don't know what it was that was in those woods outside Lacey Springs. I don't have a name for it, but I am convinced, down to my very core, that it was something old and something powerful that we're not supposed to see. And I know with a certainty that chills me to this day that it's still out there. Story 3. It was the winter of either 1979 or 1980. That much I know for sure. The exact year gets fuzzy, but the memory itself is burned into my brain, clear and sharp as the ice on the fence wire that morning. I was living out on my family's old farm in Nebraska, a solid mile from the nearest neighbor and about 5 from what you could call a town. It was a lonely stretch, but it was home. That particular morning, it was bitterly cold, the kind of cold that doesn't just nip at you. It sinks right into your bones and sets up shop. I remember waking up and the windows were just solid sheets of frost, like someone had painted them white. I had to pour hot water from the kettle on the truck's door handle just to get it open without leaving my skin behind. The sky was that flat, heavy gray that promises more snow and doesn't care if you're ready for it or not. My one job for the day, the only reason I was even going outside, was to get the mail. The mailbox was at the end of our long driveway, a good 300 yards from the house. It was a ritual. In the summer it was a nice walk, but in the winter it was a chore you did with the truck. I fired up the old Ford pickup, that familiar grumble and roar, sounding louder than usual in the dead quiet morning. The heater took forever to push out anything but cold air, so I just sat there shivering for a minute, my breath pluming out in front of me, watching the exhaust smoke curl up into the still air. I put the truck in gear and started creeping down the driveway. The gravel was buried under a few inches of snow, so it was a slow, crunching roll. I wasn't in a hurry. There was nothing in that mailbox that couldn't wait. I was just going through the motions, my mind on the warmth of the kitchen I'd just left. I pulled up to the end of the driveway, the mailbox on my right. I had this habit of not just stopping, grabbing the mail and leaving. I'd usually sit for a second, let the truck idle, and just look out at the land. It was my land, as far as I could see. To the west was a big open pasture, maybe 80 acres, dotted with a few snow-covered hay bales and bordered way in the distance by a shelter belt. A thick line of trees my granddad had planted as a windbreak decades ago. I reached out, swung the mailbox door open, and pulled out a couple of envelopes. Bills, most likely. I tossed them on the passenger seat. That's when I saw the movement. It was in the pasture, way out there, a quarter mile away, easy. At first I thought it was one of the neighbors' cows, even though I knew they'd all been moved to the winter lot weeks ago. My brain was just trying to fit what I was seeing into a box I understood. But this was wrong. The shape was all wrong. I let my foot off the brake and the truck crept forward another 10 feet, giving me a clearer view past a little rise in the field. And that's when my whole world just stopped. It was a figure, a man-like figure, but it wasn't a man. It was huge. I'm 6 feet tall, and this thing made me feel small. It had to be 7.5 feet tall, easy, and it was covered, head to toe, in this long, shaggy, dark brown hair. The hair wasn't stiff or matted. It moved. A steady wind was blowing from the north, and I could see that long hair blowing and rippling across its back and legs. It was walking south away from me with these big, purposeful strides. Its arms were ridiculously long, hanging down past its knees, and they swung with its gait. It wasn't loping or shuffling. It was walking, but with a power and a confidence that was just unnatural. It moved like it owned the ground it was walking on, like it was the only thing in the world that mattered. I froze. My hands were glued to the steering wheel. I stopped breathing. I just watched. The whole thing was utterly silent from inside the truck. The only sound was the low rumble of the engine and the thumping of my own heart in my ears. I remember counting in my head, 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, just to ground myself. I watched it for what felt like an hour, but was probably only 10, maybe 12 seconds. My mind was racing, a jumble of thoughts that couldn't find purchase. Bear? No, Nebraska doesn't have bears like that, not out here. And bears don't walk upright like that for that long. Their shoulders are all wrong. This thing was built like a man, a massive, powerfully built man. A man in a fur suit, out here, in the middle of nowhere, in sub-zero temperatures. It was insane. I had a high-powered hunting rifle right there in the gun rack behind my head, a .30-06 with a scope. I could have reached back, grabbed it, slid open the window, and looked through that scope. I could have gotten a crystal clear view, but I didn't. I was paralyzed. It wasn't just surprise. It was a deep, primal fear, the kind of fear that lives in your spine, not your brain. And then the middle part happened, the part that still wakes me up at night. The thing was still walking away, and I was just staring at its back, at the way its shoulder muscles bunched and rolled under that dark fur. Then, without breaking its stride, it turned its head. It didn't turn its whole body. It just turned its head slightly to the left, back in my direction. I couldn't see its face from that distance and angle, just the profile of a heavy, sloping brow and a mass of hair. But I knew with every fiber of my being that it was looking right at me. It was aware of me. It had known I was there the whole time. The moment it turned its head, the fear intensified from a chill to a full-blown electric current. Every hair on my arms and on the back of my neck stood straight up. My skin went tight and cold, like I'd been dipped in ice water. That's when it changed. Its walk. It had been moving with those big, steady strides. The second after it turned its head, it picked up its pace. It didn't run. It just lengthened its stride. Its movements became faster, more fluid, more powerful. It covered ground at an impossible rate. It was like watching a video on fast forward. In just a few of those new, powerful strides, it reached the shelter belt at the far end of the pasture. I watched it step into the tree line between two big cottonwoods, and then it was just gone. The dark brown fur vanished into the deeper shadows of the trees. 1 second it was there, a massive, impossible thing moving across my snow-covered field, and the next second there was nothing. Just the empty pasture, the blowing snow, and the silent, waiting trees. I sat there for I don't know how long. The truck was still running. My knuckles were white on the steering wheel. I finally took a breath, a ragged, shaky gasp that hurt my lungs. I looked down at my hands, and they were trembling. I was trembling all over. I felt cold and hot at the same time, sweat prickling on my forehead despite the freezing air in the cab. My eyes darted back to the rifle. I felt a surge of shame. Why didn't I grab it? Why did I just sit there like a scared child? But deep down, I knew why. Grabbing the rifle would have been an action. It would have meant engaging with that thing. And in that moment, I didn't want to engage. I wanted to be invisible. I wanted it to just go away, and it had. I finally put the truck in reverse and backed up the driveway faster than I ever had before. My eyes glued to the rearview mirror, half expecting to see it emerge from the trees and come charging after me. I didn't stop until I was back in the yard, and I practically fell out of the truck, stumbling my way to the house. I slammed the door shut and locked it, which was stupid because I never locked it. I stood in the kitchen, my back against the door, just listening. The house was silent. The world outside was silent. This is the part that people ask about, the part that even I question myself on, the end of the story, the part that leaves me feeling like a coward. The snow in the pasture was fresh. It had fallen the night before. If I had driven out there right then, I would have found tracks. I knew it. I had a perfect opportunity to get proof, to see the footprints of this thing, to measure its stride, to have something tangible to show for the terror I was feeling. But I was too afraid. The thought of going out into that field, of walking up to those trees where it had disappeared, filled me with a dread so complete it felt like a physical weight on my chest. What if it was still in there watching me? What if I found its tracks and they led right up to the edge of my yard? The fear wasn't just of the creature itself, but of the confirmation. of knowing for sure that something like that was real and was on my property. So I didn't go. I stayed in the house. I drank coffee I couldn't taste and tried to read the mail, but the words were just squiggles on a page. I kept getting up and looking out the window towards the west pasture. It just looked empty and normal. The snow was pristine, unbroken. It was like it had never happened. But it had. That brief sighting, maybe 20 seconds from start to finish, left a deep impression on me that has never faded. For years, I only told a few people. Most of them laughed. They'd say it was a bear, a trick of the light, that I was tired, that I'd been out in the cold too long. One guy even suggested it was a lost moose, which just shows you how little people know about wildlife. I stopped talking about it. It was easier to just keep it to myself. But then, years later, I got one of those home computers and eventually found my way onto the internet. I started reading stories from other people, from all over the country, from loggers in Washington to hunters in Pennsylvania. And they were telling my story. Not exactly, but close enough. The size, the walk, the long arms, the hair blowing in the wind, the way it just vanishes into the trees, the sheer gut-wrenching terror that freezes you in place. Reading those accounts didn't make me feel better. It didn't provide comfort. If anything, it made it worse, because it reinforced what I already knew in my gut. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't a man. It was something else. Something that lives in the quiet, empty places. Something that watches. Something that knows we're here. What I saw that bitterly cold morning in a Nebraska pasture was a Sasquatch. I have no other explanation that fits. And the memory of it turning its head, of those few seconds when it knew I was watching it, is a feeling I will carry with me for the rest of my life. It's the feeling of being seen by something you were never supposed to see. Story 4. The Three Sisters Wilderness. It's a beautiful place. It feels ancient. The moment you step onto the trail, the world changes. The air smells different, like damp earth and pine. The sounds of the road just vanish, swallowed up by the quiet. And it's not a complete silence, it's a forest silence which is full of life. You hear birds, the scurry of a squirrel, the wind moving through the highest branches. That's what it was like when we started normal, peaceful. We were maybe an hour and a half in, making good time, just following this winding path through tall, dense trees. The trail started to open up into this meadow. It was stunning. A huge bowl of green grass and wildflowers with a small creek trickling through the middle. The mountains, the Three Sisters themselves, were right there, massive and white-capped against a blue sky. We stopped for a minute just to take it in. I remember slinging my backpack off one shoulder to grab my water bottle, taking a long drink. My wife was a few steps ahead. She turned and smiled at me, her face all lit up. This was the good part. This was why we did it. That's when I heard the first branch snap. It wasn't a small sound. It wasn't a deer or a squirrel. This was a loud, sharp crack, like something substantial stepping on a deadfall log and breaking it clean in two. The sound came from the tree line to our left, the edge of the meadow, where the forest was dark and thick. We both froze, just turned our heads toward the sound. My first thought was, elk. It had to be a big bull elk. They're huge animals. They can make a racket. You hear that? My wife asked, her voice low. Yeah, just an elk, I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. We stood there for another 30 seconds, listening. Nothing. The forest had gone quiet. The birds that had been chirping in the meadow had stopped. That was the first little prickle of unease. When the birds go quiet, you pay attention. We shrugged it off, or tried to, and started walking again, following the trail as it skirted the edge of the meadow. We were planning to cross the creek and pick up the trail on the other side. That's when the grunting started. It was low, deep. It wasn't a growl, not aggressive like a bear. It was this guttural, rhythmic sound. It was coming from the same patch of trees, but it sounded closer now. It was a sound I'd never heard before in my life. It didn't sound like any animal I knew. It was too measured, too controlled. We stopped walking again. My hand instinctively went out and I grabbed my wife's arm. She was staring into the trees, her eyes wide. "What is that?" she whispered. Her voice was tight. "I don't know," I said, and I really, truly didn't. We were just standing there in the middle of this beautiful sunlit meadow, and this horrible sound was rolling out of the shadows at us. The huh, huh, huh was steady, like breathing, but heavy and powerful. Then we heard the footsteps. They were slow, deliberate. Crunch, crush, crunch. The sound of someone or something walking on the forest floor, stepping on twigs and dry leaves. It was moving parallel to us, staying just inside the tree line, keeping pace with us. My heart was starting to hammer against my ribs. This wasn't an elk. Elk don't walk like that. They're either still or they're running. This was a stalk, a purposeful, slow walk. I could feel the sweat starting to prickle on my back, under my backpack straps. My mouth felt dry. I remember thinking very clearly, we need to get out of this meadow. We were exposed, completely exposed. Let's keep moving, I said, my voice a little shaky, slowly, towards the creek. We started walking again, but our easy pace was gone. Every step felt stiff, unnatural. We were both glued to that tree line. The grunting and the footsteps kept pace with us. Huh, huh, crunch, crush. It was maybe 50, 60 feet away, but it felt much, much closer. The sound was so physical, it felt like it was vibrating in my chest. I could see the branches moving slightly where it was passing, but I never saw a shape. Nothing, just the shifting of shadows. We reached the creek. It was shallow, only a few inches deep, maybe 10 feet across. The plan was to cross here and get back into the trees on the other side where the trail picked up. As we stepped into the cold water, the sounds from the forest stopped just like that. The grunting ceased. The footsteps halted. The silence was somehow worse. It was a heavy, waiting silence. We froze again, standing in the middle of the creek, the water soaking into our boots. We looked at each other and I saw pure, undiluted fear on my wife's face. I'm sure she saw the same on mine. We didn't speak, we just listened. The only sound was the water gurgling around our ankles. Then, from behind us, back the way we had come, another branch snapped. My blood went cold. It had circled us. In that short amount of time, while we were focused on crossing the creek, it had moved back through the woods and gotten behind us. The grunting started again, this time from our right flank. Huh, huh, huh. It was closer, a lot closer, maybe 30 feet now. We were being flanked. We were being herded. Oh my God, my wife breathed out. She was trembling. I could feel her arm shaking under my hand. We scrambled out of the creek onto the far bank, our boots squelching. We were both breathing hard, not from exertion, from sheer terror. The trail here went back into the trees, but it was a thinner stretch of forest before opening into another, smaller meadow. We started down the trail, almost at a jog. We didn't talk about it. We just moved, driven by this primal need to not be in that spot anymore. For a few minutes, we heard nothing, just our own frantic footsteps and our ragged breathing. I dared to hope that whatever it was had lost interest, that we had moved out of its territory. We hit the edge of the smaller meadow and paused, chests heaving, looking back. Nothing. The forest was quiet again. Maybe it's gone, I panted. That's when my wife's eyes locked on something behind me. Her face went white. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking past me, into the trees we had just left. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Then she found her voice, and it was this strained, high-pitched whisper, like all the air had been squeezed from her lungs. "We have to go, right now. We have to leave." I turned. I didn't see anything, just trees and shadows. But I could feel it. I can't explain it, but I could feel a presence. It was like a pressure change in the air, a weight. It felt intelligent. It didn't feel like a dumb animal. It felt like we were being watched, studied, assessed. The feeling was so strong it was almost a smell, a musk of something old and wild and deeply, deeply aware of us. The grunt came again, but this time it was different. It wasn't the steady ha ha ha. It was a single, low, rumbling hump that seemed to come from everywhere at once. It wasn't loud, but it carried. It vibrated right through the soles of my boots. It was a sound of pure power. And in that sound, I heard a message. It wasn't a warning to stay away. It was a statement. I am here. This is my place. You do not belong. That was the moment of pure, unadulterated terror. It wasn't a fear of being attacked, not exactly. It was the fear of the unknown, the fear of being in the presence of something so far outside my understanding that my brain just short-circuited. This thing had intelligence. It had moved with purpose. It had circled us twice without ever showing itself. It was playing with us. We didn't run. Running felt like the wrong thing to do. It felt like it would trigger a chase. We backed away, slowly at first, never taking our eyes off the tree line. Then we turned and started walking as fast as we could without breaking into a full sprint. My backpack felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Every few steps, one of us would glance over our shoulder. The forest was still, too still. The hike back was a blur of fear. Every rustle of leaves made me jump. Every shadow looked like a moving shape. The 2-mile hike back to the car felt like 20. We didn't speak. We just moved. Our bodies tense, our ears straining for any sound. The normal beauty of the wilderness was gone, replaced by a feeling of being in a cage. The trees weren't shelter anymore. They were hiding places. When we finally broke out of the trees and saw the gravel parking lot, the sight of our car was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. We half walked, half ran to it. I fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the lock. We threw our packs in the back and scrambled inside, slamming the doors shut. I hit the lock button over and over again until I heard all the doors click. I sat there for a minute, both hands gripping the steering wheel, trying to catch my breath. I looked over at my wife. She had her arms wrapped around herself and was staring out the window back toward the trailhead. She was crying silently, tears just streaming down her face. I started the car, and we got out of there. We didn't talk for the first 15 minutes of the drive. There was nothing to say. We had both experienced it. We both knew. That was 3 years ago. We haven't been back to the Three Sisters since. We still hike, but we stick to busier trails now. I'll never forget that feeling. It stuck with me. It wasn't just the fear of the moment. It was the feeling of being stripped of all my modern certainty. Out there, in that meadow, with that thing circling us in the trees, I was just an animal, being sized up by something older and stronger. I can still hear that low, intelligent grunt in my head sometimes when it's quiet. I can still feel the weight of its gaze. We never saw it. We never figured out what it was, and in a way, that's the most terrifying part of all. Story 5. It was late spring, 1970 May, I think. The air was that soft, warm kind that makes you want to roll the windows down and just breathe. Me and my wife, we'd been in Gatlinburg for a couple of days, just a little getaway. We were heading home south on Highway 441, right through the heart of the Smoky Mountains. The park was so green it almost hurt your eyes, that deep, rich green that comes right after the spring rains. We were in our sedan, a big boat of a car, tan-colored. I remember the hum of the tires on the pavement, a steady sound. My wife had her arm out the window, her hand riding the wind. She had one of those new instant cameras with her, a Polaroid, I think it was. She was so proud of that thing, taking pictures of everything, the trees, the signs, me driving with a silly look on my face. The camera was on the seat between us, a little black rectangle. The road through there, if you've never been, it's all curves. It winds and twists alongside rivers and cuts through the mountains. You're always going around a bend, and the view just keeps changing. We were talking, not about anything important. What we were going to have for dinner when we got home, maybe. I remember I was feeling good, relaxed. The kind of relaxed you only get on a long drive in nice weather. When you've got nowhere, you need to be in a hurry. We came around one of those curves, a gentle one to the left. The sun was dappling through the trees, making shifting patterns on the road, and that's when I saw it. It stepped out from the right side of the road, from the thick brush and the shadows under the trees. It didn't lurch or stumble, it just stepped out, smooth and deliberate, like it was crossing a quiet street in a neighborhood. My brain didn't know what to do with it at first. It was just a shape, a tall, dark shape where no shape should be. My foot lifted off the gas, just an instinct. The car began to slow. Then my eyes focused, and the world just stopped. It was tall, so goddamn tall. It had to be well over 7 feet. It wasn't bulky like a bear. It was lean, built like a runner, but huge. Its arms were long, hanging down past its knees, and they swung as it moved. The whole thing was covered in this dark fur, a uniform blackish-brown color. It wasn't shaggy or matted. It looked straight, almost like a heavy coat. Its head, this is the part that gets me, even now. It didn't have a neck. Its head was just this blocky, squared-off shape that sat right on its shoulders. There was no transition, no chin, no throat, just shoulders, and then this head. I couldn't see any face, no eyes, no nose, no mouth. Just a dark, featureless mass under all that hair. It never looked at us, not once. It was like we weren't even there. It took these huge, effortless strides. It crossed both lanes of the highway in just a few steps. I remember the distance because it was so unreal. It must have covered 100 feet, easy, in 3 or 4 steps. Its legs were so long, its gait so powerful. It wasn't running. It was just walking, but with a purpose and a speed that didn't seem possible. It stepped down into the ditch on the left side of the road, a ditch that was maybe 3 or 4 feet deep. It didn't jump or climb. It just stepped down into it, like the ditch was a curb. It was so tall that stepping down into that ditch barely changed its height. Then it went up the other side and into the brush. For a second, just a second, we could see the top of its head and its shoulders moving above the low bushes, the dark fur against the green leaves. It moved through that thick undergrowth without a sound, no cracking twigs, no rustling. It just parted the bushes and was gone. The whole thing lasted maybe 5 seconds, from the time it stepped onto the pavement to the time it vanished. 5 seconds that rewired my entire understanding of the world. The car had almost rolled to a complete stop. I was just staring at the empty spot in the bushes where it had disappeared. My hands were locked on the steering wheel. I could feel the plastic ridges of the wheel pressing into my palms. My heart wasn't pounding yet. It was like it had frozen solid in my chest. Then I heard a small choke sound from beside me. I looked at my wife. Her face was white, pure white. Her mouth was open a little, but no sound was coming out. Her eyes were huge, fixed on the same empty spot. Her right hand was hovering over the seat, right over that Polaroid camera. Her fingers were curled, frozen in the act of reaching for it. She hadn't even picked it up. "Did you?" I started to say, but my voice was a dry croak. She just nodded, a tiny, jerky movement. She still couldn't speak. I looked back at the road. My body felt heavy, like it was filled with sand. I pushed my foot down on the gas pedal. The car jerked a little as it accelerated. I didn't know what else to do. I just had to get away from that spot. We drove in silence for a full minute, maybe 2. The only sound was the wind through the windows and the engine working a little harder as we started up a hill. I kept checking the rearview mirror, expecting to see something, I don't know what, coming after us. The road behind us was empty. "It was a bear," I said. The words sounded hollow, stupid. My wife shook her head slowly. She finally found her voice, but it was thin and shaky. "No, it wasn't. It had to be. A big one, standing up. Bears don't walk like that," she whispered. "Their legs, they're bowed. They waddle. That thing strode. It was smooth." She was right. I knew she was right the second she said it. I'd seen bears. I'd seen them standing on their hind legs. They're ungainly. They rock. Their back slopes. This thing was upright, perfectly upright, like a man, but it wasn't a man. It was all wrong. The head, I said, my own voice low. Did you see its head? She hugged herself, her arms wrapped tight around her middle. There was no face. That was it. That was the core of the horror. Not just the size or the speed or the fact that it was there at all. It was the lack of a face. A face is how you know what something is. A bear has a snout, eyes, ears. A man has features. This thing had nothing, a blank, dark space where a face should have been. It was like looking at a void, a walking, moving emptiness. We kept trying to rationalize it as we drove, our voices getting more and more desperate. Maybe it was a person in a fur coat, she offered. But it was a weak suggestion, and we both knew it. No person was that tall, that broad, and moved with that kind of raw, powerful grace. And who would be wearing a full-body fur coat in late spring in the Smokies? A shadow. I tried. A trick of the light? But it wasn't a shadow. It was solid. It had weight. I saw its feet, sort of. They were dark, and it planted them firmly on the asphalt with each step. I saw the way its muscles moved under that dark fur. It was as real as the car we were sitting in. The terror started to set in then, not the sharp, immediate fear, but the deep, cold kind that seeps into your bones. My hands began to shake on the wheel. I had to grip it tighter to steady them. My wife started to cry, not loud sobs, just quiet tears streaming down her face. She wasn't making a sound. We didn't stop. We didn't turn around. The thought never even crossed my mind. The idea of going back to that spot, of getting out of the car, of walking into those woods. It was unthinkable. It felt like a violation, like we had seen something we were never, ever supposed to see. The rest of the drive is a blur. The beautiful scenery was just a backdrop now, a painting we were moving past. The mountains didn't feel majestic anymore. They felt watchful, heavy. Every shadow between the trees looked like a tall, dark shape. Every rustle of leaves in the wind sounded like a footstep. We got home hours later. We didn't talk about it in the car after that first few minutes. What was there to say? We pulled into our driveway, the familiar sight of our house feeling alien and strange. We went inside and went through the motions. I remember we had a picnic basket in the back seat with some leftover food from our trip. We brought it in and just left it on the kitchen table. Neither of us could eat. That night, lying in bed in the dark, that's when it really hit me. The silence in the room was absolute. My wife was lying beside me, but I could tell by her breathing she wasn't asleep either. It never looked at us, I said into the darkness. I know. Why didn't it look at us? She didn't have an answer. That was maybe the second most terrifying part. If it had looked at us, if it had shown aggression or even curiosity, that would have been one thing. But its complete and total indifference was somehow worse. We were insects. We were nothing. It had its own business, its own path, and we were just a momentary blur in its periphery. We were so insignificant that we weren't even worth a glance. We made a silent pact that night, without ever saying a word out loud. We would never tell anyone. Who would believe us? We were a normal couple. I worked at a printing press. She was a secretary. We went to church on Sundays. If we told this story, people would smile and nod and then talk about us behind our backs. They'd say we were crazy, or that we'd been drinking, or that we just saw a bear. We couldn't stand that. The experience was too big, too real, to have it diminished like that. So we buried it. We locked it away in a box in the deepest part of our minds, and we threw away the key. For years, it was our secret, a cold stone of truth that we carried between us. It changed how I saw the world. I'd look at a dense forest and no longer see just trees. I'd see a place where something like that could live, unseen, for generations. The world became a much bigger, much stranger, and much more frightening place. My wife passed away a few years back. We were married for 48 years. We never spoke about it again after that first night. Not once. but sometimes I'd catch her looking out the window at the woods behind our house, and I'd see that same look in her eyes, the one she had in the car, the white-faced, silent terror. And I knew she was thinking about it too. Now I'm an old man, and I'm the only one left who knows. And I guess that's why I'm writing this now, because if I don't, it will die with me, and it deserves to be known. It happened. It was real. I still see it when I close my eyes, not as a nightmare, but as a memory. I see the dappled sun on the road. I see the curve. I see that tall, dark, lean form stepping out with such impossible smoothness. I see the long arms swinging. I see the blocky head with no face. I see it taking those few ground-eating strides across the highway, stepping down into the ditch like it was nothing, and then moving into the brush. And I see, clear as day, the top of its dark head, moving away through the green leaves, and then it was gone. Story 6. It was the third week of January, and the snowstorm that had hit the Oregon wilderness a few days before had been one of the worst in years. My buddy and we'd been going out to this old family homestead for more than a decade, just to check on the place, clear a bit of brush, make sure it wasn't falling completely to ruin. It was a tradition almost, but this year the storm had been brutal. Trees were down everywhere. The access road was completely impassable, and we knew if we didn't get in there with chainsaws soon, we might not get there until spring. And by then, who knows what kind of damage there'd be. So we loaded up the truck with gear, 2 steel chainsaws, extra gas and bar oil, a couple of heavy-duty come-alongs, some emergency supplies, and enough coffee to keep a small army awake. It was cold, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones and doesn't leave, even inside the truck with the heater on full blast. The sky was a flat, dull grey, the kind that promises more snow. We parked where the plows had given up, about 3 miles from the property line. From there, it was all on foot. The first mile wasn't so bad. The snow was deep, sure, up past our knees in places, but the wind had scoured some of the ridges, leaving a crust we could sometimes walk on. It was the second mile where the real work began. The storm had just shredded the old-growth forest. Douglas firs, some of them 3 feet across, lay crisscrossed over the path like a giant's game of pickup sticks. We had to fire up the chainsaws right there. I remember the smell, that sharp, sweet mix of gasoline and 2-stroke exhaust, and the deafening roar of the saws cutting through the quiet. It's a sound you feel in your teeth. We'd take turns, one cutting, one pulling the cut sections off the trail. My shoulders ached, my back was a solid knot of pain, and my hands, even inside thick gloves, were going numb. We weren't talking much. There wasn't any point. You just put your head down and work, section by section, log by log. The cold air burned my lungs with every deep breath, and the sweat from the exertion was freezing on my forehead under my wool hat. It took us hours. I lost all track of time. The world shrank down to the next tree, the next cut, the next pull. My buddy pointed ahead, his voice hoarse from shouting over the saws. "Look, the clearing's just past this next mess." He was right. Through a final tangle of younger alders and vine maple, bowed almost double under the weight of the snow, I could see a lighter patch of grey. The homestead clearing, a final burst of energy, or maybe just desperation to be done with the sawing, got us through. We cut and dragged the last of the smaller stuff, creating a narrow, rough path into the small opening. We stumbled out of the thick timber and just stood there for a minute, leaning on our knees, breathing hard, the chainsaws silent at last. The quiet was immediate and heavy. It was a small clearing, maybe an acre, with the remains of the old cabin on the far side, just a stone chimney and a pile of collapsed, snow-covered logs. To our left, the ground fell away into a steep drainage ditch, about 15 feet deep, choked with snow-covered blackberry brambles and deadfall. I straightened up, wiping sweat from my eyes with the back of my glove, and that's when I saw it. Across the drainage, maybe 60, 70 yards away, right at the tree line, was a figure. My first thought, my brain trying to make sense of it, was that it was a bear, a big one, standing on its hind legs. But that thought lasted for less than a second. It was all wrong. The proportions were wrong. It was too tall, too straight, and it was just still, unnaturally still. I didn't say anything. I just froze, my hand still halfway to my face. I nudged my buddy with my elbow. He looked up, annoyed, then followed my gaze. He saw it too. I heard his sharp intake of breath. It was massive. I've spent my whole life in these woods. I've seen black bears, grizzlies up in Alaska, elk, moose. This was bigger than any of them. It had to be 8 feet tall, maybe more. It was covered in what looked like shaggy, dark brown hair, almost black in the flat winter light. It was just standing there, facing us, its arms hanging at its sides. They were long, too long for a bear. The head was blocky, set right on its broad shoulders, with no real neck to speak of. We stood there, the two of us, just staring. The only sound was the blood pounding in my ears. A minute went by, then another. It didn't move. It was like a statue, a part of the forest itself. The silence was so complete, it felt like a physical pressure. This is the part that's hard to explain, the feeling in the air. It wasn't just fear, not yet. It was a deep, primal wrongness. A feeling that we were looking at something we weren't ever supposed to see, like we'd accidentally opened a door that was meant to stay locked forever. My mind was racing, trying to find a box to put this thing in. A guy in a fur suit, out here, in this weather, after that storm. It was impossible. A weird, deformed moose. No. The shape was all wrong. It was bipedal, humanoid, but so fundamentally not human that it made my skin crawl. Then it moved. It wasn't a big movement. It was just a slight shift of its weight, a barely perceptible roll of its shoulder. But in that absolute stillness, the movement was as loud as a gunshot. Every hair on my body stood straight up. A cold wave washed over me, a chill that had nothing to do with the January air. It was the kind of fear that comes from a place deeper than your brain, a lizard brain terror that screams, "Predator." My buddy whispered, a strangled, breathy sound. "What the hell is that?" I couldn't answer. My throat was locked shut. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it would crack them. And then it did the worst thing it could have possibly done. It went perfectly still again. But now it was different. Before, it had just been there. Now I knew, with a certainty that sank into my gut like a stone, that it was looking at us. I couldn't see its eyes from that distance, but I could feel its gaze. It was a focused, intelligent attention. It was assessing us. We were two grown men, armed with chainsaws, and I've never felt more like prey in my entire life. I felt small, insignificant, like a rabbit that had just noticed the hawks circling overhead. The standoff felt like it lasted an hour. It was probably less than 30 seconds. My eyes were watering from not blinking. My legs were trembling, partly from the cold and exhaustion, but mostly from the sheer, undiluted adrenaline coursing through me. I could smell my own fear, a sharp, coppery scent. My buddy, his voice trembling, said, "The camera, in my pack. Get the camera." It was a stupid idea, but it was an action, a thing to do. It broke the spell of just staring. I tore my eyes away from the figure for just a second, just a quick glance down at his backpack lying in the snow at our feet. That's all it took. 1 second. I looked back up. It was gone. Just gone. The spot where it had been standing was empty. There was no movement in the trees behind it, no sound of crashing branches, no footprints leading away that I could see from that distance. It had vanished as completely as if it had never been there at all. The emptiness where it had been was somehow more terrifying than the thing itself. My brain couldn't process it. Things don't just disappear. They move, they run, they make noise. This thing had just ceased to exist in the space of a single heartbeat. We both stood there, staring at the empty tree line, our mouths hanging open. The fear didn't go away. It intensified, shifting into a different kind of terror. The terror of the unknown. The terror of something that could be there 1 second and gone the next. without a trace. Where did it go? My buddy whispered, his voice cracking. I didn't know. I scanned the opposite tree line, my eyes darting everywhere, looking for any sign of movement, any dark shape. Nothing. The forest was silent and still. It felt like the whole woods was holding its breath. Then a new, even more sickening thought hit me. If it wasn't over there anymore? Where was it? The clearing was suddenly a trap. The thick timber we'd just spent hours cutting through was now a wall of potential hiding places. That thing could be 10 feet away, just behind a tree. And we'd never know until it was on top of us. We didn't need to say a word to each other. We both knew we had to get out. Now, we moved at the same time, a frantic, uncoordinated scramble. We grabbed the chainsaws. They felt ridiculously small and useless in my hands. We didn't bother to pack anything else. We just started moving back the way we came, back down the rough path we'd carved. We weren't walking. We were half running, half stumbling, crashing through the snow, our breath coming in ragged, panicked gasps. I kept looking back over my shoulder, my neck so tight it felt like cable. Every shadow between the trees looked like a moving shape. Every creak of a branch in the wind made me jump. The journey back was a blur of pure, unadulterated fear. The exhaustion was gone, burned away by the adrenaline. All that existed was the path ahead and the terrifying feeling of being watched from behind. I could feel it. A pressure on my back, between my shoulder blades. I didn't see or hear anything, but the feeling was so intense, so real, that I knew it was there, following us, keeping pace just out of sight. We didn't stop, not once. We fell, we got up, we kept going. The 3-mile hike that had taken us most of the morning felt like it took only minutes on the way back. We burst out of the trees and saw the truck, and I've never been so relieved to see a vehicle in my life. We threw the chainsaws in the back, scrambled into the cab, and I fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get them in the ignition. The engine roared to life. I slammed it into gear and spun the tires, spraying snow and gravel, not caring about anything except putting as much distance between us and that clearing as possible. We didn't speak for the first 10 miles. We just drove, white-knuckled, staring straight ahead. The heater was blasting, but I was still shivering, a deep, uncontrollable shiver that came from my core. Finally, my buddy spoke, his voice hollow. What was that? I just shook my head. I had no answer. I still don't. We'd been in those woods for decades. We knew them. We understood the animals, the weather, the risks. What we saw that day didn't fit into any of that. It was something else, something that shouldn't exist. It's been a few years now. I still go into the woods, but I never go back to that homestead. I can't, and I'm never alone out there anymore. That day changed something fundamental in me. It stripped away the comfortable illusion that we are the top of the food chain, that we understand the world we live in. I saw something in that clearing that I can't explain, something huge and silent and intelligent, something that looked right at me and then vanished into thin air, and sometimes late at night when the wind is right. I remember the absolute stillness of it before it moved, and the crushing silence after it was gone, and I wonder if it's still out there. And I wonder if it remembers us too. Story 7. Okay, so I've never really posted anything like this before, but I need to get this off my chest. It's been eating at me for a while now, and I figure if anyone might understand, it's people here. I'm just a regular guy. I work in IT, live in the suburbs, nothing special. But what happened last summer? Well, it changed how I see things. I still get chills thinking about it. It was July 23rd, 2025. My wife and I were on vacation with her friend. Let's call her Sarah, though that's not her real name. But for the sake of this, it's easier. We'd rented this cabin outside Gatlinburg, Tennessee, way out in the woods. It was one of those places you see online, all rustic and cozy, surrounded by dense forest. We'd been looking forward to it for months, just a chance to unwind, you know? No work, no emails, just nature. The cabin itself was nice. Wood-paneled walls, a big stone fireplace, and this huge deck with a hot tub overlooking a steep hill covered in trees. When we arrived earlier that day, the weather was perfect, warm but not too hot, with the sun filtering through the leaves. We spent the afternoon unpacking, making some food and just relaxing. Sarah and my wife were laughing about some inside joke, and I was just soaking it all in. Everything felt normal, peaceful. The woods were alive with sounds. Birds chirping, insects buzzing, the occasional rustle of leaves. It was exactly what we needed. As evening rolled around, we decided to hop into the hot tub on the deck. The sun was starting to dip behind the trees, casting long shadows, but it was still light out. The air was cooling down, and the steam from the tub felt great on my skin. We'd brought out some drinks and we were just talking, joking around, watching the forest. At first, everything was fine. I remember feeling so relaxed, my muscles loosening up in the warm water. My wife was leaning back, eyes closed, and Sarah was pointing out a squirrel scampering up a tree. It was one of those moments where you think life is good, but then slowly things started to change. I didn't notice it at first, but the forest got quiet. I mean dead quiet. One minute there were crickets and frogs making their usual racket, and the next, nothing. It was like someone had flipped a switch. The silence was so heavy, it felt physical, like a weight pressing down on us. I remember my wife sitting up straight and saying, "Hey, did you hear that? Or not hear it, I mean." Sarah nodded, her smile fading. We all stopped talking and just listened. Nothing. Not a single sound. No wind, no animals. Nothing. It was eerie, like the whole world had gone mute. I felt a knot form in my stomach. I'm not usually a jumpy person, but this was different. It wasn't just quiet, it was wrong, like something was off. I scanned the trees down the hill, trying to see if there was a reason, maybe a predator nearby, like a bear or something. But I didn't see anything at first. The woods were thick with bushes and undergrowth, and the light was starting to fade, making shadows dance. Then I heard it. A slow, heavy movement from the trees below. It wasn't like a deer or a small animal. This sounded big, like something taking deliberate, heavy steps. Crunch, 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 slow and steady. My heart started beating faster. I leaned forward in the hot tub, the water sloshing around me, and peered into the forest. My wife and Sarah were frozen, their eyes wide. "What is that?" Sarah whispered, her voice shaky. I kept staring, and that's when I saw it. About 100 yards away, behind a clump of brush, there was this large black head and shoulder peeking out. It was solid black, even in the direct sunlight that was still hitting that spot. The texture looked like thick fur, matted and dark, and it reminded me of a gorilla, but not quite. It was bigger, I think. The head was massive, and it was just there, motionless, like it was watching us. But the weirdest part was that I couldn't make out any facial details. No eyes, no nose, nothing. It was just a dark shape, but it felt intelligent, like it knew we were there. I stared at it, my mind racing. Was I seeing things? Maybe it was a trick of the light or a shadow, but it was too defined, too real. I could see the way the fur moved slightly in the breeze. Wait, there was no breeze. Everything was still. My skin prickled with goosebumps, and I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead, despite the warm water. I must have been holding my breath, because when I finally exhaled, it came out shaky. I looked away for a second, toward the cabin wall, just to break the fixation. You know how sometimes if you stare at something too long, your eyes play tricks on you. I thought maybe that was it. I blinked a couple of times, took a deep breath, and then glanced back. And it was gone. Just like that. Vanished. The spot where it had been was empty, nothing but leaves and branches. For a moment we all just sat there, silent. Then my wife said, "Did you see that?" Her voice was barely above a whisper. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Sarah was clutching the edge of the hot tub, her knuckles white. The silence was still there, pressing in on us. Then, from the direction where I'd seen the thing, we heard a series of loud cracks, like branches snapping under immense weight. Crack, crack, crack. It sounded like trees being broken one after another, but it was moving away from us, fading into the distance. The sounds got quieter and quieter until they were gone, and then slowly, the forest noises started creeping back in. First a lone cricket, then a frog, then more. It was like the world was waking up again, but the feeling of being watched didn't go away. It lingered, this heavy, uneasy sensation that made the hair on my arms stand up. We didn't wait around. We scrambled out of the hot tub, grabbing towels and rushing inside the cabin. I locked the door behind us, my hands trembling. We didn't say much at first, just stood there listening, but everything outside seemed normal again. The bugs were chirping, the night sounds were back, but it felt like a cover, like something was still out there. We ended up sitting in the living room, huddled together, talking in low voices. My wife kept asking if I was sure about what I saw, and I told her yes, I was sure. Sarah said she'd seen it too, just for a second before it disappeared. We tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a bear, or a big dog, or even someone in a costume. But none of that made sense. Bears don't stand like that. And why would anyone be out here in the middle of nowhere dressed like that? And the silence. That wasn't normal animal behavior. I couldn't sleep that night. Every little noise made me jump. The creak of the cabin, the wind picking up outside. I kept replaying it in my head. That black head, the heavy steps, the branch cracks. The more I thought about it, the more it scared me. It wasn't just the sight, it was the feeling that came with it, this primal fear, deep in my gut, like I'd stumbled into something I wasn't supposed to see. The next day, we did go out and look around, but I won't get into that because the horror was all in that evening. Nothing we found changed what happened. Steep, dense woods, no tracks, no signs, just normal forest. But that memory stuck with me. It still does. I've never believed in monsters or ghosts or anything like that, but now, I don't know. Something was out there, something old and hidden, and it saw us. I can't explain it, and I probably never will. All I know is that on July 23rd, 2025, in Gatlinburg, Tennessee, I caught a glimpse of something that shouldn't exist, and it haunts me to this day. Story 8. All right, I'll just get right into it. I've never written this down before, never really told anyone the whole thing because it sounds insane. But I've seen other people post similar stuff here, and I figure, what the hell? Maybe someone else knows what I'm talking about. This was back in November of 2003. I was living alone in this little apartment above a garage in Welches, Oregon. It was a weird time in my life. I'd just gone through a rough breakup, and I needed to get away from everything, from Portland, from my friends, from all of it. I wanted quiet. I found this place online, a converted space above a big detached garage. The main house was down a gravel drive, but the family who owned it was away for a few months. I had the whole property to myself. The apartment was small, just one main room with a kitchenette, a bathroom, and a sleeping loft you reached by a ladder. But the view, man, the view was why I took it. The back of the place was all windows, looking right out over the Salmon River and the edge of the Mount Hood National Forest. In the daytime, it was all deep green pine trees and that grey rushing water. It was peaceful, or it was supposed to be. That day, a Tuesday, had been like any other. I'd worked my remote IT job on my laptop, made some crappy pasta for dinner, and was just settling in on the couch with a book. It was already dark out. In November up there, it gets dark early, like 4:30, 5 o'clock. It was chilly, but I had the little wood stove going, so it was cozy. The only sounds were the crackle of the fire and the river, which was this constant low roar in the background. You got so used to it, you almost didn't hear it anymore. Then, at exactly 6 o'clock, it happened. It wasn't a knock. A knock is polite. This was a single massive bang on my front door. It wasn't like someone hitting it with a fist. It was like something huge and solid had thrown its whole weight against the wood. The door, this solid wood door, actually shook in the frame. I felt the vibration through the floorboards. I froze. My book slid off my lap onto the floor. My heart just launched into my throat, pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears. For a second, I couldn't even breathe. My first stupid thought was, a bear? Did a bear just slam into my door? But it didn't sound like an animal accident. It was too deliberate, too forceful. I was sitting maybe 15 feet from the door. There was a deadbolt, a chain, and a regular lock. I always kept them locked. My eyes were glued to the door, expecting it to just splinter inward. Nothing happened for maybe 10 seconds. The silence was worse than the noise. It was a heavy, waiting silence. Then I heard the breathing. It was low and wet sounding, like someone with a bad chest cold, but deeper, much deeper. And it was right outside the door. I could hear it over the river, a thick, guttural inhale and exhale. My skin went cold all over, like I'd been dunked in ice water. This wasn't a person. I knew that right away. No person breathes like that. I didn't even think. I scrambled off the couch, my legs feeling like jelly, and I crab-walked backwards toward the kitchen area, never taking my eyes off the door. I fumbled for my cell phone on the counter. My hands were shaking so bad I almost dropped it. I punched in 911. The operator's voice was calm. 911. What's your emergency? I was whispering, my voice tight and high with panic. There's someone at my door. Something. It's trying to get in. It's not human. I know I sounded hysterical. She asked for my address, which I stammered out. She told me to stay on the line, that a deputy was on his way. Welch's is small. She said it could be 20, 30 minutes. It felt like a death sentence. I crouched down behind the kitchen counter, the phone pressed to my ear. The operator was saying something about staying calm, but I wasn't listening. All I could hear was that breathing. And then it changed. The breathing stopped and it was replaced by this grunting. It was a low, rumbling sound, like a pig, but with more bass, a vibration that I could feel in my chest through the floor. It wasn't aggressive, not like a growl. It was curious, probing, and it was moving. I heard heavy, slow footsteps on the wooden deck outside. Thump, drag, thump, drag. Each step was deliberate and heavy. It was walking the length of my deck, which ran along the front of the apartment and wrapped around to the side where the big windows were. The operator was saying, "Ma'am, are you still there? Can you tell me what you're hearing?" I couldn't speak. My mouth was too dry. I just listened as the footsteps moved past the front door and around the corner of the building. It was heading for the windows. My whole body was rigid. I was curled into a ball behind the counter, but I had to see. I had to know where it was. I started to slowly, so slowly, rise up, just enough to peek over the edge of the counter toward the big bank of windows. The woods were pitch black. My outside light, a single yellow bug light by the door, didn't reach far. The tree line was about 50 feet away, a solid wall of darkness. At first I didn't see anything, just the reflection of my own room in the glass, the warm lamplight, the flicker of the wood stove. Then I saw them, 2 points of light, reflecting back from deep within the trees. They were high up, too high. They were a dull, yellowish green, like the eyes of a dog or a deer caught in headlights, but bigger, much bigger, and they weren't moving. They were just fixed on me. My breath hitched. I ducked back down, my heart hammering against my ribs. I couldn't process it. The height was all wrong. For eyes to be that high off the ground, whatever it was, had to be enormous. 7, 8 feet tall at least. I gathered every bit of courage I had and looked again. This time, as my eyes adjusted, I saw more than just the eyes. I saw the shape around them. It was massive and dark, darker than the shadows of the forest. It was just standing there at the very edge of the tree line, perfectly still. It had a head that was huge and seemed to be covered in shaggy, dark fur. I couldn't make out a clear face, just that dark shape and those two unblinking eyes, locked right on the window, right on me. It was watching me. The grunting had stopped. The footsteps had stopped. It was just standing there, observing. That was somehow more terrifying than if it had been trying to break the glass. The intelligence in that stare was palpable. This wasn't some mindless animal. It knew I was in here. It knew I was scared. It was studying me. I slid back down to the floor, pulling my knees to my chest. I was crying silently, tears just streaming down my face from sheer, unadulterated terror. I was trembling so hard my teeth were chattering. I couldn't look away from the window, even from my hiding spot. I was waiting for the sound of glass breaking. The operator's voice was a tiny, distant thing in my ear. "The deputy is en route. Just stay quiet. Stay where you are." I don't know how long I sat there. It felt like hours. The creature never moved. I could still feel its presence, that heavy, oppressive feeling of being watched. The air in the room felt thick and cold, despite the fire. I was too scared to even shiver properly. I just sat there, frozen, every muscle in my body clenched tight, listening to my own ragged breathing and the frantic beating of my own heart. Then I heard a car engine, the crunch of tires on gravel, the most beautiful sound I have ever heard in my entire life. A spotlight swept across the windows, lighting up the whole forest edge. I risked a glance. The eyes were gone. The dark shape was gone. The spot where it had been standing was empty. I sobbed in relief, a harsh, ugly sound. I scrambled to my feet and ran to the door, fumbling with the locks. I yanked it open just as a Clackamas County deputy was walking up the steps, his flashlight beam scanning the deck. He was a young guy, looked calm. "You the one who called?" he asked. I just nodded, my whole body still shaking. I couldn't form words. I pointed a trembling finger toward the tree line. He shone his light out there, the beam cutting through the darkness. "What did you see, ma'am?" I finally found my voice. It was hoarse and broken. There was something out there, a thing, big. It had eyes. It was watching me from the trees. He walked down the steps and onto the grass, his flashlight sweeping back and forth. I stayed in my doorway, the cold night air biting through my thin shirt. I watched him walk all the way to the tree line. He stopped, bent down, then stood up and walked back. "Nothing out there now?" he said when he got back. "No tracks I can see, ground's a bit frozen, could have been a bear. They get curious sometimes, especially if they smell food." "It wasn't a bear," I whispered. I knew how I sounded, like a crazy person. He gave me a sympathetic look. "I'll take a walk around the property, make sure everything's secure. You should go back inside, lock up. You're safe now." I went back in and locked the door, but I didn't feel safe. I stood at the window, watching his flashlight beam move around in the woods. He was out there for maybe 15 minutes. When he came back, he just gave me a thumbs up from the driveway and got in his car and left. The second his taillights disappeared down the drive, the silence came back. The heavy, waiting silence. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the couch with every light in the place on, staring at the window, waiting for those eyes to reappear. They never did. I moved out a week later. I told the landlord a family emergency had come up. I couldn't stay there another night. A few months after I got back to Portland, I was in a bar and got talking to an older guy who said he'd grown up in Welch's. I told him my story, bracing for the laugh. He didn't laugh, he just nodded, took a long drink of his beer and said, "Yeah, the old-timers around here, they don't go into the deep parts of the forest after dark. They say there are things living back in there that were here long before we were, things that watch us." I never saw it again. I never heard that bang on my door or that low guttural grunting, but sometimes, on a quiet, cold November night, I'll remember the absolute primal fear that locked my body in place. And I'll remember the shape in the trees and those two unblinking, intelligent eyes, just watching. And I know with a certainty that chills me to the bone that it wasn't a bear, it was something else, and it knew I was there. Story 9. All right, so I've never really posted anything like this before. I mostly just read these stories and keep to myself. But what happened to me back in March of 2013, I can't shake it. I think about it all the time, especially when it gets dark out. I need to get this out there because keeping it to myself is just making it worse. Maybe someone else has seen something like this. I don't know. But I swear on everything, this is exactly what happened. It was a Tuesday night in March 2013. I remember it was a Tuesday because my mum had her bowling league that night and she'd just gotten home. It was cold but not freezing, that wet, chilly air that soaks into your bones. I was 19, living at home with my mum out in the country. Our property backed up against a big stretch of woods, the kind that just goes on for miles. We had a couple of old, rusted-out trailers parked near the tree line, just junk, really, from the previous owners. A security light was mounted on a pole near them, one of those motion-activated ones. But it was old and kinda stayed on all the time, casting this sickly yellow glow over the gravel and the trailers. That night, I was just restless. I couldn't settle on anything to watch on TV, and I just felt this need to be outside. So I went out onto the back porch. It was around 9 o'clock. The house was quiet. My mom was inside, probably reading or getting ready for bed. I remember leaning against the porch railing, just listening. That's one thing I've always loved about living out here, the night sounds. You hear everything, crickets, the occasional hoot of an owl, the rustle of leaves as some possum or raccoon moves through the underbrush. It's peaceful. It normally makes me feel calm. I was just standing there, my breath making little clouds in the air, my hands shoved deep in my jacket pockets. I was looking out toward the woods, past the trailers. The security light made long, weird shadows from the trailers, stretching out toward the trees. Everything was washed in that dull orange-yellow light, and then I heard it. It wasn't a small sound. It wasn't a deer or a raccoon. This was a heavy, deliberate crunch. Like someone big was stepping on a bunch of dry branches and leaves, a solid thump crunch, thump crunch. It was coming from the direction of the trailers, over to my left. My head snapped toward the sound. My first stupid thought was, oh, maybe it's a bear. We don't get a lot of bears around here, but it's not impossible. I squinted, trying to see past the glare of the security light into the darker patches between the trailers, and then I saw it move, a shift in the shadows. My heart, which had been beating normally, just slammed into my throat. I froze, my fingers gripping the cold wood of the porch railing. It stepped out from behind one of the trailers, right into the full glow of that security light. It wasn't a bear. I'm 6 feet tall. This thing, it absolutely dwarfed me. It had to be at least 9 feet tall, just massive. It must have weighed 500 pounds. Easy. It was built like a refrigerator, but a hairy one. It was covered in this thick, shaggy, dark brown hair. It was so dense I couldn't see any skin underneath. It looked matted in places, like it had been through brambles. Its head was what got me the most. It wasn't round like a man's. It was a pointed oval, like a giant, hairy football stuck on its shoulders. It had no visible neck that I could see. Its head just sort of sat right on its torso, and its torso... It had this big, round gut that stuck out, a real beer belly, but on this gigantic frame. Its arms were long, hanging down past its knees, and they were thick like tree limbs. It just stood there. It wasn't moving. It was facing me, I think. It was just standing under that light, completely still. My brain short-circuited. I couldn't process what I was seeing. This wasn't a person in a suit. This wasn't a trick of the light. This was a solid, living, breathing thing standing 50 feet away from me. The clarity was terrifying. I could see the way its hair moved slightly in the breeze. I could see the texture of its skin, which was a dark, leathery black, where the hair was thinner around its face. Its eyes, they were set deep under a heavy brow, and they were just dark pits, but I could feel them looking at me. I could feel its attention focused on me. My whole body went cold. It was a cold that started in my stomach and spread out to my fingers and toes. I couldn't move. I couldn't even breathe. I was just locked in place, staring at this thing that had no business existing in my backyard. Time just stopped. It felt like we stood there, it under the light and me on the porch for an hour. It was probably only a few seconds. Then, this wave of something else hit me. It wasn't courage, not really. It was a nervous, jittery energy, like when you're so scared you do something stupid just to break the tension. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it would crack them. Without even thinking about it, I puckered my lips and I whistled. It was a short, sharp whistle, the kind you'd use to call a dog. It wasn't loud, but in the dead quiet of the night it sounded like a gunshot. The thing reacted instantly, its head turned. Not its whole body, just its head. It rotated on that almost non-existent neck and looked right at me, and that's when the fear went from a cold dread to a pure, electric terror. Before, its gaze felt general. Now, it was specific. It was, for me, its eyes. I still can't describe them properly. They weren't glowing or red or anything like in the movies. They were just deep, dark, and intensely focused. It felt like being stared down by a predator, a smart one. There was an intelligence there that was so alien and so ancient, it made my skin crawl. It wasn't the blank stare of an animal. It was a knowing look. It was assessing me. We stayed like that for another eternity. It's staring at me frozen solid on the porch. My legs felt like water. I was lightheaded. I thought I was going to pass out. I could smell the damp earth and the faint, weirdly sweet smell of the rotting leaves from the woods. But now there was another smell too, a musky, heavy odor like wet dog and old dirt that the breeze carried over to me. That was its smell, I'm sure of it. Then it moved. It didn't run. It didn't make a sound. It turned its head back to face the woods, and it started to walk. But it didn't just walk straight into the trees. It was cautious. It moved slowly, deliberately, putting one of those huge, flat feet in front of the other, and it used the trailers for cover. It stepped behind the first one, disappearing from view for a second. Then I'd see its huge shape appear from behind the next trailer, moving at an angle toward the woods. It was like it was using them as shields, keeping the trailers between it and me. It knew I was there, it knew I was watching, and it was hiding its retreat. I watched its broad, hairy back as it moved, the way its muscles shifted under that thick coat, the sheer bulk of it. It was so real, so physical. It reached the tree line, and without even breaking stride, it just melted into the shadows between the trees. 1 second it was there, a massive silhouette against the darker woods, and the next it was gone. The woods were silent again. The crickets had stopped. Everything had stopped. That's when the ability to move came back to me. It was like a spell broke. I stumbled backward, my legs feeling like rubber, and I fumbled for the screen door handle. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely get a grip. I finally yanked it open and practically fell into the kitchen. My mum was at the sink, washing a cup. She turned and saw me. I must have looked insane. I was pale, shaking, breathing in these short, ragged gasps. "What's wrong with you?" she asked, her voice sharp with concern. I couldn't form a proper sentence. My mouth was dry. "Outside," I choked out. There's something outside, by the trailers." She dried her hands on a towel and came over to me, peering out the kitchen window. "I don't see anything." "It was there," I said, my voice trembling. "It was huge. It looked at me." She looked at me like I was crazy for a second, but she must have seen the genuine, raw terror on my face. She's a tough lady. She grabbed a big flashlight from the drawer and marched toward the back door. "Come on then, show me." I didn't want to go. I wanted to lock all the doors and hide in a closet, but I followed her, my whole body screaming at me to run the other way. We went back out onto the porch. The night sounds were starting up again, tentatively. A single cricket chirped. She clicked on the flashlight, its bright white beam cutting through the night, so much harsher than the security light. She swept it across the yard, over the gravel, across the faces of the old trailers. Nothing. She pointed it at the tree line. Nothing but trees and shadows. "See?" she said, her voice softer now. "There's nothing there." But there was. I knew there was. I walked her down the porch steps and across the damp grass to the spot where it had been standing. The ground was soft. I pointed with a shaking hand. "Right here." She shone the light down, and there they were. In the mud, right under the security light, were footprints. They weren't human. They were massive, easily 18 inches long and half as wide. The toes were broad, and the shape was all wrong. They pressed deep into the ground, way deeper than my boot prints ever could. My mum went quiet. She just stared at the footprints for a long time. She didn't say bear or hoax. She just looked from the prints to the woods and back to me. Her face was serious. "Let's go inside," was all she said. We went back in and I locked the door. I locked every door and checked every window. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat on my bed, staring at the wall, seeing that thing standing under the light every time I closed my eyes. The image is seared into my memory, the pointed head, the beer belly gut, the sheer impossible size of it, the way it turned its head when I whistled, the intelligence in that look, the way it used the trailers for cover, like it was thinking, planning. I've never gone out there at night again, not once. Even during the day, I get a bad feeling when I have to go near those trailers. I sold my four-wheeler because the trails I used to ride are in those woods. I can't do it. That thing was real. It was there. And I have no idea what it was, or why it was in my backyard, or what it wanted. I just know that I saw it, and I've never been the same since. Story 10. I'd been interested in the whole Sasquatch thing for years, ever since I was a kid, really. Just reading books and watching documentaries, the usual stuff. I never thought I'd actually go out looking for it. It was more of a fun idea, you know? But then I found this group online, a research group based out of Portland. They weren't crazies. They were serious scientists, ex-military, just normal people who thought there was something to it all. After a few online chats, they invited me on a weekend expedition. I figured, why not? It'd be a cool camping trip if nothing else. So that day, I met up with them at a diner just off the highway east of Portland. There were 5 of us total. The leader, a guy I'll just call Mark because that's his name, but I won't use last names. He was in his 50s, built like a guy who spent his life outdoors, with this calm, quiet confidence that made you feel safe. Then there was a younger couple, Sarah and Ben, both really into wildlife biology, and another guy, Dave, who was just a quiet, hulking presence. We had some coffee, went over the maps, and then we caravanned out to this spot Mark knew. It was way out there, down a series of logging roads that got progressively worse until it was basically just 2 ruts in the moss. We got to the campsite in the afternoon. It was this little clearing by a creek, surrounded by these massive old-growth firs. The light was already getting that long, golden quality, slicing through the trees. It was beautiful, but even then I remember feeling a little, I don't know, watched. I shrugged it off. You're in the deep woods. Of course you feel a little exposed. We set up our tents in a tight circle, got a small fire going just for morale. The plan was to wait until full dark and then do a night excursion along this old closed road that Mark said cut through a really active valley. As the sun went down, that's when the feeling started to change. It wasn't just quiet, it was silent. I mean, dead silent. No birds, no squirrels chattering, nothing. Just the sound of the creek, which suddenly seemed really loud. We were all talking in low voices without even meaning to. We ate some dinner, just reheated chili, but nobody had much of an appetite. The energy had shifted. It's hard to describe, but it was like the woods had taken a deep breath and was holding it. We all felt it. You could see it in the way everyone's eyes kept darting towards the tree line. When it was properly dark, just a sliver of moon, we geared up. Headlamps, but we had red filters on them to preserve our night vision. We carried backpacks with recording equipment, thermal cameras, the works. Mark had this thing he called a tree knocker, which was just a solid piece of hickory about the size of a baseball bat. We left the camp and started walking in a single file line along this old road. It was overgrown with ferns and salal, but you could still make out the path. The ground was soft with decades of fallen needles. Mark was in the lead, then me, then Sarah, Ben and Dave taking up the rear. We walked for maybe 20 minutes in almost total silence, just the soft crunch of our boots and the sound of our own breathing. The beam from my red headlamp made the world look like a dark room, all shadows and deep, blood-colored blacks. The trees pressed in on both sides, a solid wall of darkness. That feeling of being watched was back, but it was stronger now, a physical pressure on the back of my neck. I kept wanting to turn around, but I didn't. I just focused on Mark's back. After a while, Mark stopped and held up a fist. We all froze. He listened for a minute, then he lifted the tree knocker and hit a big cedar tree next to the road. The sound was incredibly loud in the silence, a deep, resonant knock that seemed to vibrate right through my chest. He did it twice more. Thwack, thwack. We stood there, not moving, not breathing, just listening. For a full minute there was nothing, just the silence, which felt heavier than before. Then, from way up on the slope to our left, we heard it. A light tap, then another. It wasn't a branch falling, it was too deliberate. Tap, tap, tap. My heart just started hammering against my ribs. This wasn't my imagination. Everyone heard it. I saw Sarah's hand shoot out and grab Ben's arm. Mark turned his head slowly towards the sound, and I could see the tension in his jaw even in the dim red light. He knocked again. Thwack, thwack. So thwack. A few seconds later, from the same general area, but maybe a little further along the slope, came the response. Tap, 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 tap. Something was up there, and it was paralleling our movement. We started walking again, but slower now. My senses were dialed up to 11. Every little rustle in the ferns made me jump. I could smell the damp earth, the sap from the trees, my own sweat. My mouth was dry. We kept going, and Mark would knock every few hundred feet, and every time, after a short pause, there would be an answer from the slope. It was keeping pace with us. It was intelligent. It was communicating. The road started to curve around to the right, following the contour of the hill. The slope on our left got steeper. That's when it happened. The terror moment. It's burned into my brain. We were just coming around the bend. Mark was a few feet ahead of me. He hadn't knocked. We were just walking, listening to the thing moving through the trees above us. Then, from the trees directly to our left, no more than 50 feet away, maybe less, this sound erupted. It wasn't a tap, it was a knock. But it was like nothing I've ever heard. It was deep, so deep, I felt it in my teeth. It was powerful, like someone hitting a tree with a sledgehammer. Boom. Then another, immediately after. Boom. The force of it was physical, a shockwave in the air. It wasn't a random crack of wood. It was intelligent. It was a statement, I didn't think. My body just dropped. I hit the ground on my stomach, my face in the damp ferns and dirt. I could hear the others doing the same around me, this series of soft thuds as we all hit the deck. My heart wasn't just hammering anymore. It felt like it was going to explode out of my chest. I was shaking all over, a full-body tremble I had no control over. I could taste dirt and my own fear, this metallic, coppery taste in my mouth. We were all on the ground, just lying there. I could hear someone, I think it was Sarah, breathing in short, ragged gasps, trying not to sob. Mark was the only one who moved. He slowly, so slowly, lifted his head just enough to look towards where the sound had come from. And then he spoke. His voice was so soft, barely a whisper. but it carried in the unnatural silence that had followed the knocks. "We hear you," he said. "We mean you no harm. Nothing, no sound." The forest was holding its breath again. The pressure in the air was immense. I felt like I was at the bottom of the ocean. Then, from the same spot, another knock. Boom! Just one. It wasn't aggressive. It felt measured. Mark waited a beat. Then he said, "Thank you." He was talking to it. He was having a conversation with it. My mind was screaming, "This isn't happening, this isn't real." But it was. It absolutely was. He knocked softly on the ground with his own knocker. Tap, tap, tap. A moment passed. Then from the trees, boom, boom, boom. A perfect response, a back and forth. It was respectful. It was intense. It was the most terrifying and awe-inspiring moment of my entire life. This thing, whatever it was not an animal. It was conscious. It was aware. It was choosing to engage with us. This went on for a few minutes. Mark would speak softly or knock a pattern, and it would answer. The knocks were so loud, so close, I could feel the vibration through the ground. I dared to lift my head just a little, peering into the wall of blackness. I couldn't see anything, just the solid, impenetrable dark between the tree trunks, but I knew it was there. I could feel its presence, a huge, solid weight in the shadows, watching us. Finally, Mark whispered, so low we almost didn't hear it, "We're going to leave now. We're going back the way we came." He didn't wait for an answer. He just started slowly, carefully, getting to his feet. We all followed, moving like we were made of glass, terrified of making a sudden noise. We turned around and started walking back down the road, the way we had come. We weren't walking anymore. We were retreating. It was a full-on, quiet, controlled panic. And we were being followed. We could hear it, not knocks now, but movement, the soft, heavy crunch of footsteps in the duff, keeping pace with us from the slope. It wasn't trying to be quiet. It was letting us know it was there. Every few seconds, there would be a rustle, the sound of a branch snapping under a significant weight. Then we started hearing the vocalizations. They were low, not a growl, not a howl. It was like a series of grunts, deep and guttural, but with a weird, almost musical quality to them. It was a language. It was communicating with others, or maybe just with itself, commenting on our retreat. That's when I saw the eyes. I happened to glance to my left, up the slope, and I saw it, a pair of eyeshine. But it wasn't the red or green you see with a deer or a raccoon. This was a dull, yellowish green. It was big. The eyes were set wide apart, and they were high off the ground, really high. My brain tried to process the height and just stalled. Then, a little further back, another set, this one with a reddish tint, and another. There wasn't just one. There were at least 3 of them, moving through the trees, tracking us. I looked forward again, my blood running cold. I didn't want to see any more. I just focused on putting one foot in front of the other. The walk back to camp felt like it took a lifetime. Every second, I expected something to burst out of the trees. Every rustle felt like it was right behind me. The grunts and the footsteps followed us all the way back to the edge of the clearing. We didn't stop at the camp. We didn't even look at each other. We just went straight to the trucks, fumbling with the doors, piling in. Mark started his engine and we followed suit. We drove out of there, bouncing down those terrible roads as fast as we dared, not saying a word. It wasn't until we were back on the paved highway, with the lights of the city glowing in the distance, that anyone spoke. We pulled into an all-night truck stop. We just sat in a booth, clutching cups of coffee we didn't drink. We were all in shock. No one knew what to say. We just looked at each other. And in everyone's eyes I saw the same thing. A fundamental understanding of the world had been shattered. We hadn't found a monster. We had met a person, a wild, ancient, powerful person who lived in the woods we thought we knew. That was it. That was the day. We packed up and went home the next morning. We've talked a few times since in emails, but it's hard. How do you talk about something like that? I haven't been camping since. I look at the woods differently now. I know what's in there. Not a legend, not a story. It's real, it's intelligent, and it's aware of us. That night, it chose to let us know it was there. It chose to communicate. I don't know why. I'll probably never know why. But I know, with a certainty that sits in my bones, that it was real. And sometimes, late at night, if the wind is right, I can still hear those knocks, and I feel that same primal fear, and I know the wild is a lot bigger and a lot deeper than I ever thought. Story 11. I still don't know what to make of it. I'm writing this down because I can't keep it in my head anymore, and maybe if I get it out, I'll stop seeing it every time I close my eyes. It happened last year, in the fall. We were going up to our family's cabin, the one my grandpa built decades ago. It's way out there, down miles of dirt roads that feel like they're taking you back in time. No cell service, just trees and quiet. Usually, I love it. Now, I'm not so sure. That night, we were running late. We'd left later than we meant to, after my brother's soccer game ran long. It was already full dark by the time we turned off the main highway onto the gravel road that leads to the cabin. The last 12 miles are the worst, winding, narrow, with deep ditches on either side. The trees are so thick they make a tunnel, and your headlights are the only thing cutting through the black. I was in the back seat behind my dad, who was driving. My mom was in the passenger seat, and my brother was slumped against the window, already half asleep next to me. The radio was off. The only sounds were the crunch of gravel under the tires and the hum of the engine. It was cold enough that you could see your breath a little inside the car. I remember my jeans felt stiff, and I had my hoodie pulled up over my head. We'd been on the gravel road for maybe 20 minutes. My dad was driving slower than usual because the road was washboarded and full of potholes from the last rain. The headlights would bounce, illuminating the canopy of pine branches overhead for a second before dropping back down to the road. It was that kind of deep, empty dark where you feel like you're the last people on earth. Then, my dad sort of straightened up in his seat. I saw his hands tighten on the wheel. "What is that?" he said, his voice low. My mom leaned forward, squinting. "A deer." I sat up and looked. Ahead, maybe 100 yards up the road where it curved to the left, there was a shape moving. It was coming down the steep embankment on the right side, stepping out onto the road. The headlights caught it, but it was still far enough away that it was just a dark silhouette against the darker trees. "It's walking kind of funny for a deer," my mom said, her voice unsure. We kept rolling forward, maybe going 20 miles an hour. The figure reached the middle of the road and just stopped. It turned its body, and that's when the headlights finally hit it full on. It wasn't a deer. It was standing on two legs. It was huge. I mean, massive. My dad's a big guy, 6 feet tall, and this thing made him look small. It had to be over 7 feet tall. Easy. Its shoulders were impossibly broad, and it was covered head to toe in this dark, shaggy hair. It wasn't fur like a bear. It was like long, matted hair. Almost black, but with a reddish tinge in the high beams. It wasn't a person in a suit. I've seen those videos. This was different. The way it moved was all wrong. Its arms were too long, hanging down past its knees. When it turned, it didn't just turn its head. Its whole upper body swiveled with a heavy, powerful motion. The stride wasn't a walk. It was a lumbering, like each step was heavy, like it weighed so much that its feet were sinking into the gravel. It was just standing there, facing us. I couldn't see its face clearly, just a dark patch where a face should be. But I got the sense of a heavy brow. It didn't make a sound. For a second, maybe two, nobody in the car made a sound either. It was like all the air got sucked out. My heart was suddenly hammering in my ears. My brother, who'd been asleep, woke up and said, "What's going on?" But his voice was a thin, scared whisper. My mum gasped, a sharp, choked-off sound. Her hand flew to her mouth. My dad didn't say a word. His foot just slammed down on the gas pedal. The engine roared. The tires spun on the loose gravel for a heart-stopping second before catching, and the car shot forward. The force threw me back against the seat. My head snapped back. The thing was still just standing there, right in our path. For a horrible moment, I thought we were going to hit it. I braced for the impact, but we didn't hit it. As we barreled toward it, the thing took a step, just one long, fluid step that carried it from the middle of the road to the left-hand shoulder in a movement that seemed too fast for something that size. It didn't run. It just moved. It was like watching a shadow slide. We flew past the spot where it had been. I twisted in my seat, pressing my face against the cold glass of the back window, my heart trying to beat its way out of my chest. I saw it just for a second, standing at the edge of the trees. It was still facing the road, watching us go. Then the trees and the darkness swallowed it. Nobody spoke for a full minute. The only sound was the car engine whining and the gravel pinging against the undercarriage. My dad was driving way too fast for that road, the car swerving and bouncing, but none of us told him to slow down. My brother was the first to break the silence. "What was that?" he asked, his voice trembling. My mum turned around in her seat. Her face was pale, her eyes wide. She looked at my dad. "That was it," she said. "That was the same thing." That's when the bottom dropped out of my stomach, because the night before, my parents had come up to the cabin alone to drop off some supplies. When they got back home, they'd mentioned seeing a big black bear on the road in almost the exact same spot. My dad had joked that it was standing on its hind legs like it was trying to hitchhike. We'd all laughed. It wasn't funny anymore. "That wasn't a bear," my dad said, his voice tight. His knuckles were white on the steering wheel. He kept checking the rearview mirror, his eyes flicking up every couple of seconds. We didn't talk about it the rest of the way to the cabin. The mood in the car was thick and heavy with fear. Every shadow between the trees looked like it was moving. Every sound the car made felt like a warning. When we finally pulled up to the cabin, my dad didn't even turn the car off. He just said, "Everybody inside, now." We scrambled out of the car and ran for the door. My fumbling with the key in the lock felt like it took forever. The woods around the cabin were silent, eerily silent. No crickets, no owls, nothing. We got inside, locked the door, and my dad went around checking all the windows, pulling the curtains shut. We didn't bother unpacking the car. We just sat in the living room in the dark, listening. I didn't sleep much that night. Every creak of the old cabin, every gust of wind made me jump. I kept seeing it in my head, that huge dark shape turning in the road, the way it moved with that heavy, purposeful stride. It wasn't an animal running away. It was something else, something that looked at us and decided to move. The next morning, the fear was still there, but it was mixed with a weird, shaky curiosity. The sun was out and the woods looked normal again. Peaceful. It felt stupid to be so scared in the daylight. After a quiet breakfast, my dad said we should go back to the spot. My mom didn't want to. "Why, John? Why would we do that?" "I just need to see," he said. He had that look he gets, stubborn and set. "I need to know if we all just lost our minds last night." So we all got back in the car. My brother and I didn't say anything, but I know we were both thinking the same thing. What if it was still there? Driving back down that road in the daylight was surreal. It looked so different. Just a normal, bumpy gravel road. Birds were chirping. Squirrels were running around. We got to the curve, the one where we'd first seen it coming down the embankment. My dad pulled the car over and stopped. We all got out. The air was cool and crisp. We stood there for a minute, just looking around. Nothing seemed out of place. Then my brother pointed. "Look." On the right-hand side of the road, where the thing had come down the hill, there was a thick, woody vine, the kind that grows all over the trees out there. It was thick, like a rope, and it was torn in two. Not cut, not broken from age. Torn. The broken ends were frayed and splintered, like something incredibly strong had just ripped it apart to get through. My dad walked over to it. He reached out and touched one of the broken ends, then looked up the hill. "There's a path," he said, his voice quiet. We all looked. Through the dense undergrowth of ferns and fallen leaves, there was a clear line. Something big had gone through there. You could see where ferns were crushed flat and where the moss and leaves on the ground were scraped away, leaving dark, wet earth underneath. It wasn't a deer trail, it was wider, and there were these long, smooth marks, like something heavy had been dragged. It went straight up the steep hill and disappeared into the thicker woods. We were just standing there, looking at this torn vine and the slide marks, not saying anything. The normal sounds of the forest seemed to fade away. The reality of it was setting in. Something had been here, something big. That's when we heard another car. A minivan came around the curve and slowed down when they saw us standing there. The driver, a guy probably around my dad's age, rolled down his window. He had his wife in the passenger seat and a couple of kids in the back. "Everything okay?" he asked. "Yeah," my dad said, but he sounded uncertain, just looking at something. The guy in the van looked at us, then at the torn vine, and his expression changed. He got a serious, almost nervous look. "You folks didn't happen to see anything strange around here last night, did you?" My family went completely still. "Why do you ask?" my mom said, her voice careful. The man glanced at his wife, then back at us. "Because we did. Last night, around 10:30, we were coming back from a late dinner. We saw something on this road." He told us their story. They'd been driving just like us. They came around this same curve and saw a figure in the road. He said it was huge, covered in dark hair, walking on two legs. He said it was so close they could see the muscles moving in its back. It walked right past the front of their car, he said, within 5 feet of his headlights. He said it didn't run. It just walked, with this slow, heavy gait, like it owned the place. It walked across the road, stepped over the ditch like it was nothing, and vanished into the trees on the other side. It didn't even look at us, the man said, and I could hear the disbelief still in his voice. It just ignored us, like we weren't even there. His wife nodded, her face pale. "We didn't tell the kids it was Bigfoot or anything," she whispered, as if saying the word too loud might summon it. "We said it was a very big bear. We just stood there, us and this other family, on the side of a remote road in the middle of nowhere, sharing this impossible secret. 2 different families, 2 different cars, 1 night apart, seeing the exact same thing in the exact same spot. It wasn't a hallucination, it wasn't a bear, it was real." The man in the van wished us a good day and drove off. We got back in our car and drove to the cabin in silence. We tried to have a normal weekend, but it was pointless. We were all jumpy. Every little noise from the woods made us freeze. We kept the doors locked, even during the day. I keep going back to that moment in the headlights, the sheer size of it, the way it moved, that heavy, non-human stride. The complete silence, the way it just watched us, then moved out of the way with an ease that was terrifying. It wasn't scared of us, it wasn't scared of the car, it was just there. And the evidence was there too. The torn vine, the slide marks, the other family's story. It all fit together into a picture I didn't want to see. I've spent a year trying to rationalize it. A person in a costume, out here at night, why? And how do you explain the other family? A bear. Bears don't walk like that. They don't stand 7 feet tall and ignore cars. They don't tear vines in half and leave drag marks up a hill. I don't know what it was. I just know what I saw. I know what we all saw, and I know that whatever it is, it's still out there in those woods. Walking. The terror of that moment is stuck in me. A cold, hard knot in my stomach that hasn't gone away. It left a mark on all of us, a chilling reminder that in all those wild, quiet places, there are things we don't know, things that walk in the dark, just beyond the edge of our headlights, and sometimes they step into the light. Story 12. All right, I'll just get this out. I've never typed this up before, never talked about it online, and I'm not going to use any names. It's just easier that way. This happened back in 2016. I was in my late 20s, and I went hunting with my two uncles in a wildlife management area in southwest Oklahoma, not far from Lawton and Warwicker Lake. We'd planned this trip for a couple of weeks. It was supposed to be a simple, early-season deer hunt. Nothing fancy. We decided to use bows. My uncles had crossbows, and I had my compound bow. I also carried a .38 revolver on my hip, but that was just for snakes. You know how it is out there. You don't think twice about rattlers when you're walking through tall grass in the dark. We met up at my place around 4 in the morning. I remember the air was already thick and humid, the kind that sticks to your skin. We loaded up my truck in near silence, just the clatter of gear and the low mumble of pre-coffee voices. The drive out was quiet too. No radio, just the hum of the tires on asphalt, and then the crunch of gravel under them when we turned off the main road. The sky was that deep, star-punched black. You only get way out from any town lights. We pulled off onto a dirt track that led into the management area, parking in a small clearing we'd used before. It was pitch dark. I mean, you couldn't see your hand in front of your face. The truck's headlights cut 2 bright tunnels into the nothing, and when I killed the engine, the darkness just swallowed everything whole. It was that heavy, complete kind of dark that makes your ears ring. We got out, the truck doors thudding shut. Sounds that seemed way too loud. We were standing by the tailgate just starting to get our gear sorted. I was slinging my bow over my shoulder, checking the pistol on my hip for the 10th time, just a nervous habit. My one uncle was messing with his crossbow, and the other was taking a slow drink of water. It was totally normal. Just 3 guys getting ready to head into the woods. Then it happened. There was no warning, no rustle in the trees, no snap twig, no nothing. 1 second it was the usual pre-dawn quiet, just crickets and the faint sigh of wind, and the next second the world just tore open. This sound. God, I don't even know how to describe it. It wasn't an animal sound. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't a cougar. It wasn't anything I'd ever heard on TV or in a movie. It was a roar, but that word doesn't do it justice. It was a roar, mixed with a guttural, screaming yell. It didn't start quiet and get louder, it just was. It was instantly at full volume, a physical force that hit us in the chests. I felt it. I'm not just saying I heard it loud. I felt the vibration of it in my ribs, in my teeth. The air itself seemed to shake. It was so powerful and so deep that for a split second I couldn't breathe. And then, as quickly as it started, it tapered off into this high, piercing scream that just faded into the trees. That whole thing probably lasted 3-4 seconds tops. The silence that came after was almost worse. It was a dead, suffocating silence. The crickets had stopped. Everything had stopped. I don't know who moved first. I think it was all of us at once. There was no discussion, no, what was that? We just moved. It was pure animal instinct. All 3 of us scrambled for the truck. Not the cab, the truck bed. We practically fell over each other, clambering into the back of my pickup, scrambling until our backs were pressed hard against the rear window of the cab. We were sitting shoulder to shoulder, shoulder to shoulder, knees pulled up, just a tight, terrified huddle of men. I had my .38 out. I don't even remember drawing it. My hand just did it. I was pointing it toward the tree line, toward where the sound had come from. But my arm was shaking so bad I couldn't hold it steady. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard, I thought I was going to be sick. I could feel my uncles shaking too. I could feel the tremors running through the truck bed from their bodies. We just stared into the blackness. Our eyes were wide, straining to see anything, but it was useless. It was like staring into a wall of ink. Then we heard the grunts. They were low, rumbling sounds, not like a pig, deeper, more chesty. They were coming from the same direction as the roar, and they were getting closer. Each one was like a punch in the gut. And then we felt the footsteps. That's the part that really makes my skin crawl, even now. We felt them. The ground was shaking, Not a lot, but enough to feel it through the tires of the truck, through the metal of the bed. Thump, thump, thump. They weren't fast, light steps. They were heavy, crashing steps. It sounded like something huge was just plowing through the underbrush, snapping branches as it came. I heard trees cracking, not little twigs, but proper branches. The sound like a gunshot in the quiet. I kept my pistol aimed, my finger on the frame, right beside the trigger. I was praying I wouldn't have to fire. Not because I was brave, but because I was so terrified that shooting might make it charge us. I was staring so hard into the darkness that my eyes started playing tricks on me, seeing shifting shadows and shapes that weren't there. But I never saw it. I never saw a silhouette or eyes or anything. Just the impenetrable dark and the sound of this massive thing moving around out there. Maybe 50, 60 yards away, it felt like it was circling us. The footsteps and the grunts would come from one direction. Then after a minute, they'd seem to come from another. It knew we were there. There was an intelligence to it. It wasn't just some dumb animal blundering through the woods. It was moving with a purpose, and that purpose felt like it was to scare the living hell out of us. We didn't speak a single word, not one. We didn't even look at each other. We just sat there, frozen, backs pressed against the cab, listening to this thing stomp and grunt around our truck for what felt like an eternity. I remember the smell. I remember the sharp, coppery taste of fear in my mouth, and I remember this other smell that came on the wind. It was a musky, foul odor, like rotten meat and wet fur. It was thick, and it made my stomach turn. Time lost all meaning. It could have been 10 minutes or an hour. I have no idea. We just sat there, trapped in our own private hells of fear, waiting for something to happen, waiting for it to come crashing out of the trees and rip the truck apart. I kept picturing a huge, dark hand reaching over the side of the truck bed. I was gripping my pistol so tight, my knuckles were white and aching. Slowly, ever so slowly, the blackness started to soften. The sky went from pure black to a deep, dark blue at the horizon. The stars began to fade. Dawn was coming, and as the light grew, the sounds stopped. The grunts ceased. The heavy, earth-shaking footsteps just ended. The last branch snap echoed, and then there was nothing. Just the gradual return of the morning birds, chirping like nothing had happened. We didn't move. We stayed in that truck bed until the sun was properly up, until we could see the individual leaves on the trees and the dew sparkling on the grass. The world looked normal, peaceful. It made the whole night feel like a shared nightmare. Finally, my oldest uncle shifted. He let out a long, shaky breath. It was the first real sound any of us had made in over an hour. We looked at each other then. Their faces were pale, eyes wide with a shock I knew was mirrored in my own. We climbed out of the truck bed, our muscles stiff and protesting. My legs felt like jelly. We didn't say anything. We just stood there for a minute, listening. The forest was just a forest again. My one uncle gestured with his head toward the tree line. We nodded. We spread out, but we stayed close, maybe 10, 15 feet apart at most. We weren't going to let each other out of sight. We moved toward where we thought the sounds had come from. The ground was hard-packed clay and rock, not good for holding tracks. We didn't find any footprints, nothing clear anyway, but we found other things. We found a bunch of broken branches, not just fallen ones, but ones that were snapped off about 7 or 8 feet up the trunks of decent-sized trees. They were fresh, the broken ends still oozing sap. We found patches of grass and undergrowth that were flattened down, like something big and heavy had been standing there or had walked through. In one spot, there was a clear path of bent-over grass and crushed plants leading off deeper into the woods. It was about as wide as my shoulders. We followed it for a little ways, but none of us wanted to go far. The feeling of being watched was so intense, it was like a physical pressure on the back of my neck. We stopped after maybe 100 feet. We just looked at each other, and without a word, we all turned around and walked back to the truck. We packed our gear up. We hadn't even fired a shot. We hadn't even left the clearing. We just loaded everything back into the cab, got in, and I started the engine. The sound was obscenely loud. We drove out of there, bouncing down that dirt road, and none of us said a single word the entire drive back to the highway, not one. We got back to my place, unloaded the truck in silence, and my uncles just got into their car and left with a nod. That was it. We never talked about it. Not that day, not the next week, not ever. It was an unspoken pact. It was too big, too terrifying to put into words. Talking about it would have made it real in a way that just remembering it wasn't. But it was real. It happened. I still have the 38. I still go out into the woods sometimes, but never alone, not anymore. And I'm always listening, always on edge, especially in the dark. Every snap of a twig makes me jump. Every weird noise sets my heart racing. I'm left with this hole of an explanation. I don't know what it was. I don't believe in monsters, but I know what I heard, what I felt shaking the ground, what I smelled. It was something that shouldn't exist, but it does. And the memory of that sound, that deafening, body-shaking roar that came out of nowhere, is something that stuck with me. A cold knot of fear in my gut that's never really gone away. I was just standing by my truck, and then the world exploded, and then it was just gone. Story 13. It was a Tuesday, I remember, because I'd taken the trash out to the curb the afternoon before, and the truck had just come that Monday. Little details stick, you know? It was the middle of summer, so the air was thick and heavy even with the AC running. I'd gone to bed around 10, everything normal. My dog, an old coonhound named Buddy, was asleep on his bed in the corner of the room. Nothing felt off. I woke up at 3 in the morning, not like you wake up from a bad dream or because you have to pee. I just snapped awake. My eyes were open and I was completely alert, heart already starting to thump in my chest. It was that kind of primal feeling, like some deep, ancient part of my brain was screaming that I wasn't alone. The room was dark, just the faint green glow from my alarm clock and a little moonlight filtering through the blinds. I didn't move at first. I just listened. The house was silent, no creaks, no wind, nothing. Buddy was still asleep, snoring softly. That should have comforted me, but it didn't. Then I looked over at the window. My bedroom is on the first floor. It faces the back of the property, straight into the woods. There's a big old oak tree about 20 feet away, but otherwise it's just a clear view into the darkness. The window itself is one of those double-hung types, with 2 panes of glass. The bottom one is covered by the blinds, but the top one is usually clear because I like to see the sky when I'm lying in bed. There was a face in the top pane. My brain didn't process it at first. It was just a dark shape, a blotch against the slightly lighter darkness of the night outside. But then my eyes adjusted and the details came into a horrible, sharp focus. The head was massive. It nearly filled the entire top window pane. I'm talking from one edge of the frame to the other. My window isn't small. The sheer size of it was the first thing that sent a cold jolt straight through my guts. It had a wide, heavy face, not human. The structure was all wrong. The brow was thick and prominent, like a solid shelf of bone over its eyes. Its skin was a greyish colour, but not a smooth grey. It looked rough, like old leather or tree bark. It had dark hair, but it wasn't like head hair. It was patchy, like mange on a dog. And you could see more of that greyish skin underneath in places, but the worst part was the eyes. They were deep set, sunk back under that heavy brow, but they were locked right on me. They weren't glowing or anything demonic. They were just dark pits, but I could feel them. I could feel its gaze. It wasn't blinking, it wasn't moving, it was just staring, studying me while I slept. I couldn't breathe. My lungs felt like they were made of stone. Every hair on my body was standing straight up. I've never felt terror like that. A pure, undiluted animal fear that turned my blood to ice water. My mind was racing, trying to find a logical explanation. A bear? No. A person in a mask? Impossible. The size was all wrong. The proportions were alien. This thing was taller than the window. Its head was at the top of the window. To look in like that, it would have to be, I don't know, 8, 9 feet tall, maybe more. I don't know how long we stayed like that. Me frozen in my bed, it frozen at my window. It could have been 5 seconds or 5 minutes. Time lost all meaning. The only sound was the frantic thumping of my own heart in my ears. Buddy was still asleep. That fact kept echoing in my head. Why isn't Buddy awake? He barks at possums on the roof. He'd lose his mind if a stranger was this close to the house. But he was dead asleep. It was like this thing didn't exist to him, or he was too scared to acknowledge it. I knew I couldn't just lie there. I had to do something. Moving felt like a death sentence. I was convinced that if I so much as twitched, it would shatter the glass and come for me. But the paralysis was starting to be worse than the thought of action. My flashlight was on the nightstand, a big, heavy mag light I keep for power outages. My right arm was closest to it. I moved it slowly, so slowly. I focused on the feeling of the cotton sheet under my fingertips, the slight pull of the muscle in my shoulder. I didn't take my eyes off its eyes. They didn't move. They didn't track my hand. They just stayed fixed on where I was lying. My fingers brushed the cool, grooved metal of the flashlight. I curled my hand around it, my grip slick with sweat. My thumb found the button. This was it. I was either going to see what this thing was, or I was going to piss it off. I took a shallow, shaky breath and pointed the flashlight at the window, my arm feeling like a dead weight. I pressed the button. The beam was blinding in the darkroom. It hit the glass, and for a split second, the face was illuminated in stark, terrifying detail. The rough texture of the skin, the way the patchy hair looked almost like moss, the sheer mass of its head and its eyes. They flashed, not with a light from within, but they reflected the beam back at me with an amber, almost golden glow. Like a cat's eyes, but bigger, much bigger, and in that brilliant reflected light I saw intelligence. This wasn't some dumb animal. It was aware. It was thinking. The light seemed to startle it. It didn't jump or snarl. It just blinked. A slow, deliberate blink. And then it turned its head away. The movement wasn't jerky. It was smooth, powerful. It pulled its head back and away from the window, disappearing from view in an instant. The second it was gone, the spell broke. Adrenaline flooded my system so hard I felt dizzy. I scrambled out of bed so fast I tangled my legs in the sheets and fell onto the floor with a thud. I didn't care. I clawed my way up, still clutching the flashlight, and ran to the window. I fumbled with the wand for the blinds, my hands trembling so badly I could barely grip it. I finally yanked it, sending the blinds flying up with a loud clatter. I pressed my face to the glass, cupping my hands around my eyes to block out the bedroom light, and shone the flashlight into the yard. It was already halfway to the tree line. The beam caught its back. It was huge. The shoulders were immense, rounded and powerful, covered in that same patchy dark hair. It was walking on 2 legs, its gait long and effortless, just eating up the distance between my house and the woods. It was so tall, so impossibly tall. It didn't look back. It just strode into the wall of trees and was swallowed by the darkness. I stood there for a long time, maybe 10 minutes, just shining the light at the spot where it had disappeared. My whole body was shaking uncontrollably. My teeth were chattering. I felt cold and hot at the same time. I finally backed away from the window and went through the house, turning on every single light. I checked the locks on all the doors and windows. I was too scared to even look out the other windows. What if there was another one? Buddy finally woke up, confused by all the lights and my frantic pacing. He just wagged his tail and looked at me like I was crazy. I sat on the couch in the living room with every light on and waited for the sun to come up. I didn't sleep another wink. As soon as the first hint of grey light touched the sky, I went outside. I had to see. I had to know I hadn't lost my mind. I walked around to the back of the house, to my bedroom window. The grass was wet with dew, and right there, directly under my window, was a patch of pressed down grass. It was a perfect impression, like something very heavy had stood there for a long time. The grass was flattened in two distinct, large shapes, not like shoe prints. They were just impressions, and they were big, really big. I knelt down and just stared at them. This was proof. It was real. I didn't call the police. What would I say? Hey, a 9-foot-tall monster was staring in my window last night. They'd think I was drunk or crazy. I called my dad later that morning. I tried to sound calm, but my voice was shaking. I told him what happened. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then he just said, "Son, you saw something in the woods. You lock your doors and you leave it alone." The way he said it, it was like he wasn't entirely surprised. It was the most chilling part of the whole thing. That was the only time I ever saw it. But it changed everything. I went to the home improvement store that same day and bought the brightest motion sensor lights they had. I had a guy come out and install them all around the house, especially on that back corner. I keep my curtains closed now, all the time, day and night. I never open the blinds on that window anymore. I can't. I still feel uneasy, especially when I'm home alone after dark. I'll be watching TV and I'll just get this feeling, this prickling on the back of my neck, and I'll have to fight the urge to look at the windows. I'll hear a branch snap outside and my heart will just stop. The worst part isn't even the memory of its face, as bad as that is. The worst part is the knowing. Knowing that something that big, that powerful, that aware, is out there in those woods. Something that can stand outside your home in the dead of night and watch you sleep, and you'd never know it was there until it wants you to. Something that tall, something like that, it shouldn't exist. But it does, I know it does, and I know it saw me. Story 14. It was a Saturday in late September. I remember that much. The air was starting to get that crisp feel, you know, where you can smell the pine and damp earth even with the windows up. We were driving east of Mackenzie Bridge in Oregon, heading back home after spending the morning hiking around Proxy Falls. My wife was in the passenger seat, and the kids were in the back. Our son was about 8 at the time, and our daughter was 6. They were tired from the walk, kind of dozing off, and the car was quiet except for the hum of the engine and the soft static from the radio that wasn't quite picking up a signal. The road out there is narrow and winding, lined with dense forest on both sides. Tall Douglas firs and cedars, so thick you can't see more than a few feet into the woods. It's beautiful, sure, but there's something about that area that always felt a little off to me. Not haunted or anything, just isolated, like you're the only people for miles, even though you're not far from civilization. That day, though, it felt heavier, like the trees were pressing in on us. We'd been driving for maybe 20 minutes, just cruising along at a steady pace. I was focused on the road, watching for deer or anything that might dart out. My wife was scrolling through her phone trying to find some music, but service was spotty. The kids were quiet in the back, and I remember glancing in the rearview mirror, seeing them both slumped against their seats, half asleep. Everything was normal, you know? Just another family drive through the Oregon woods. Then I saw it. Out of the corner of my eye, on the left side of the road, there was this dark, hairy figure standing just at the edge of the tree line. It was maybe 30, 40 feet away, and it was motionless. I mean, completely still, like a statue. At first, I thought it was a bear or something. But bears don't stand like that, upright on 2 legs, and it was tall, way taller than any man I've ever seen. I'd say over 6 feet, easily, maybe even 7. Its body was covered in dark, matted hair, almost black, and it was bulky, like it was built solid. But what got me was how it just stood there, not moving, not making a sound. It was facing the road, and I couldn't see its eyes, but I felt like it was watching us. My heart started pounding right away. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel, and I must have slowed down a bit without realizing it. "Did you see that?" I said, my voice coming out kind of shaky. My wife looked up from her phone, confused. See what? She asked. I pointed with my chin toward the left side, over there by the trees. But when I glanced back, it was still there, just standing. I didn't want to stare too long because I was driving, but I couldn't look away. That's when my wife gasped. Not a loud scream, just this sharp intake of breath. "Oh my God," she whispered, and she was pointing to the right side of the road. I jerked my head that way, and there was another one. Another figure, just like the first, but on the opposite side. Same dark hair, same massive build, standing perfectly still. This one was a bit closer to the road, maybe 20 feet away, and I could see more detail. The way its arms hung down, long and thick, and how its shoulders were hunched. It didn't move at all, just stood there like it was part of the forest. My mind was racing. What the hell were these things? Bears don't stand like that, and they're not that tall. And why were there two? I felt this cold sweat break out on my forehead, and my hands were getting slippery on the wheel. I remember my breath catching in my throat, and I could hear my own heartbeat thumping in my ears. The kids must have sensed something, because they stirred in the back. Our son sat up and said, "Dad, what's wrong?" But I didn't answer right away. I was too busy trying to process what I was seeing. Then our daughter, who was usually the quiet one, piped up. "I see it too," she said, her voice small and scared. "The big monkey on the right." That's what she called it, a big monkey, and she was pointing at the same figure my wife had seen. Our son leaned forward, peering out the window. "Yeah, I see it. And there's another one over there." He was pointing to the left, where I'd first spotted the thing. That's when it hit me. We were seeing two different creatures at the same time, one on the left, one on the right, and they were both just standing there, motionless, like they were guarding the road or something. The air in the car went thick with fear. I could feel it, this heavy weight pressing down on us. My wife reached over and grabbed my arm, her fingers digging into my skin. "Just keep driving," she said, her voice tight. "Don't stop." So I did. I pressed down on the gas pedal, not too hard because I didn't want to lose control on the curve, but enough to pick up speed. The car surged forward, and I kept my eyes glued to the road, but I couldn't help glancing in the side mirrors. As we passed them, I looked back, first to the left, then to the right. And that's the part that still messes with my head. When I turned to look again, they were gone. Both of them. Vanished, like they'd never been there at all. The left side was empty, just trees and shadows. The right side was the same. Nothing. No movement, no sound, nothing. It was as if they'd melted back into the forest. I slowed down a little, my heart still hammering, and I asked the kids, "Do you still see them?" They both shook their heads, looking confused and scared. Our son said, "They disappeared, Dad." And our daughter started to cry softly. We drove in silence for a few minutes, nobody saying anything. I could feel the adrenaline fading, leaving me shaky and cold. My wife was pale, staring out the window like she expected to see something else. The forest outside seemed darker now, more menacing. Every shadow looked like it could be one of those things. I kept checking the mirrors, half expecting to see them following us, but there was nothing. After a while, my wife finally spoke. "What were those?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I shook my head. "I don't know. Maybe... I don't know." I didn't want to say it, but the word Bigfoot was floating in my mind. I'd heard stories, of course, but I never put much stock in them until then. The kids were quiet in the back, and I could hear our daughter sniffling. I reached back and patted her leg. "It's okay, sweetie. We're safe now." But I wasn't sure if that was true. We drove for another 10 minutes or so, and the tension in the car started to ease a bit. The road straightened out, and we passed a few signs for campgrounds and other spots, so I knew we were getting closer to more populated areas. But I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Every time we went around a bend, I expected to see another one of those figures. My knuckles were white from gripping the steering wheel so tight, and my shoulders were tense. When we finally pulled into a gas station a little ways down the road, I felt like I could breathe again. We all got out of the car, and the kids clung to us, not wanting to let go. My wife and I just looked at each other, and I could see the same fear in her eyes. We didn't talk about it much right then. We just filled up the tank and got back in the car, but on the drive home, we started piecing it together. I mentioned how I'd seen the one on the left first, and my wife said she saw the one on the right at almost the same time. The kids confirmed they'd seen both. That's when it dawned on me that we hadn't just seen one creature. We'd seen two, maybe more, because who knows how many were hidden in the trees. The thought sent a chill down my spine that I can still feel today. It wasn't just a lone animal or some trick of the light. There were multiple of them, and they were coordinated somehow. Standing there on both sides of the road, like they were surrounding us. We got home that evening, and the kids were quiet for the rest of the night. My wife and I stayed up late talking about it in hushed tones so the kids wouldn't hear. We tried to rationalize it. Maybe they were just bears, or people in costumes or something. But bears don't stand that tall or vanish that quickly, and who would be out in the middle of nowhere dressed like that? It didn't make sense. Over the years, we've talked about it off and on, and the terror of that day has never really faded. It's like a shadow that follows us. Every time we go camping or driving in the woods, I'm on edge, watching for those figures. And what gets me the most is the realization that hit us later, that we saw different creatures at the same time. It means they're not solitary. They travel in groups. And if there were two that we saw, how many more were out there that we didn't? I've never told anyone else about this, not even close friends, because I know how it sounds. But it happened, and I can't explain it. The memory is burned into my brain, the way they stood, so still and silent, the way the air felt thick with danger, and the way they disappeared without a trace. It's left us with this shared but unsettling memory and a deep-seated fear of what might be lurking in Oregon's wilds. Even now, I sometimes wake up at night thinking about it, and I wonder if we were ever in real danger, or if they were just watching. But I'll never know, and that's the part that haunts me the most. Story 15. It was the summer between 6th and 7th grade, the kind of summer that seems to stretch on forever when you're a kid. I was 12 years old. I'm pretty sure it was 1996, but it might have been 97. The exact year gets a little fuzzy, but the day itself is burned into my brain, clear as if it happened yesterday. I was spending a few weeks at my grandparents' ranch out in Howinson. It was my favorite place in the world. Wide open fields, the smell of hay and horses, and my grandpa, who was this solid, quiet mountain of a man. He didn't talk much, but when he did, you listened. That particular day had been hot and lazy, the kind of heat that makes the air shimmer over the dirt driveway. It was getting on in the afternoon, probably around 5 or maybe 6. The sun was still up, but it was starting to throw long, deep shadows from the big oaks near the house. My grandma was in the kitchen, and I was just loafing around on the porch steps, feeling the warm wood on my bare legs. My grandpa came out of the barn, his face all business. He told me to come with him. One of the horses, a big chestnut mare named Penny, hadn't come back with the others for feeding. This wasn't like her. Grandpa was already carrying his rifle, a heavy old bolt-action thing. That was the first thing that felt off. When we'd go for walks before to check fences or just to wander, he never brought the rifle. Never. It stayed in the rack in the mudroom, but he had it now, slung over his shoulder like it was the most natural thing in the world. I didn't think much of it then. I was just excited to be going on an adventure with him. We headed out past the last pasture gate and into the woods that bordered the property. This wasn't a friendly little forest. It was dense, a real Oklahoma tangle of oaks and underbrush, dark even on a bright day once you got a few yards in. The path was narrow, just a deer trail really. The air changed the moment we stepped under the canopy. It got cooler, damper, and the sounds of the ranch, the distant whinny of a horse, my grandma's radio, just vanished, swallowed up by this heavy silence. It wasn't a peaceful quiet. It was a waiting quiet. We walked for what felt like a long time, a mile, maybe a little more. The light was getting low, turning a deep golden green where it managed to punch through the leaves. We weren't talking. Grandpa was in front, his boots making soft thuds on the damp earth. I was following, my eyes scanning the shadows, not because I was scared yet, but because I was looking for a lost horse. I remember the smell down there, that rich, decaying smell of old leaves and wet dirt. Then we smelled something else. It was a smell I knew from finding dead things in the woods before, a possum or a raccoon. But this was stronger, much stronger, a thick, coppery, rotten sweetness that made the back of my throat tighten. Grandpa stopped walking. He held up a hand, and I froze right behind him. He was staring off to the left of the trail into a particularly thick patch of brush. He didn't say anything. He just started moving that way, slow and deliberate, pushing branches aside with the barrel of his rifle. I followed, my heart starting to thump a little harder now, and then I saw her. It was Penny, or what was left of her. She was on her side, legs sticking out all stiff and wrong. Her belly was open, torn open. There was a huge, ragged cavity, and her insides were just gone. Not neatly either. It was a mess. The ground around her was dark and soaked, and the smell was so powerful it was like a physical thing, pushing at me. Flies were already there, a buzzing, shimmering cloud. Her eyes were open and cloudy. I felt my stomach lurch. I had to look away, focusing on a scratch on my sneaker instead. My grandpa let out a long, slow breath. It wasn't a sigh of sadness, really. It was more like a confirmation. He knelt down, not touching anything, just looking. "Coyotes," he muttered, more to himself than to me. Or maybe a wolf pack got her good. It made sense. We had coyotes out there. You could hear them yipping at night sometimes. But looking at the sheer size of the damage, it seemed like a lot for coyotes. It seemed violent. I didn't say anything, though. Grandpa was the adult. He knew about these things. He stood up, his knees cracking. "Nothing to be done for her now," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "Let's get back. It'll be dark soon." He turned to go back to the trail, and I was right on his heels, eager to get away from that smell, from the sight of poor Penny. We'd only taken a few steps back onto the path when he stopped dead. I almost ran into his back. This stop was different from before. It was instant, absolute. Every muscle in his body went rigid. He didn't hold up a hand this time. He just went perfectly still, like a deer that's just heard a twig snap. My first thought was that there was another animal, maybe the thing that had killed Penny, lurking nearby. I peered around his side, my eyes following his line of sight. He was looking up, not ahead, not on the ground, up into the trees. It took a second for my eyes to adjust, to pick out the shape from the shadows and the leaves. It was about 30, maybe 40 feet away, maybe 20 feet up, sitting on a thick horizontal branch of a massive oak tree. It was big. That was my first, overwhelming thought. It was just so damn big. It was hunched over, but even sitting, I could tell it was huge. It was covered in hair, long, shaggy hair that was a dark, muddy brown, almost black in the fading light. Its arms they weren't right. They were way too long. They hung down. Its hands, I guess they were hands, resting on its knees or dangling past them. The proportions were all wrong, like a person's but stretched out, and then it moved its head. It wasn't a quick animal movement. It was slow, deliberate. It turned its head just enough to look down at us, and that's when I saw its eyes. They weren't like a bear's eyes or a deer's eyes. They were set forward in its face, and they caught the last little bit of light filtering through the trees. And they glowed, not like a flashlight or anything crazy, but with a faint greenish-yellow shine, like a cat's eyes do when your car headlights hit them at night. That low, internal gleam, those eyes just locked onto us. There was no curiosity in them, no animal fear. It was just a look, a flat, intelligent stare that went right through me and froze the blood in my veins. I couldn't move, I couldn't breathe. I just stood there, my fingers gripping the back of my grandpa's flannel shirt, my whole body screaming with a kind of primal fear I didn't even know existed. This wasn't a fear of being hurt. This was a fear of something other, something that shouldn't be. My grandpa was still a statue. I could feel the tension thrumming through him. Then, with a movement so slow it was barely perceptible, he started to bring the rifle down from his shoulder. He was trying to do it without making a sudden jerk. The leather sling made a soft creak. The moment the rifle moved, the thing changed. Its whole posture shifted. It went from being still to being coiled, electric with energy. It didn't make a sound, no growl, no roar. It just reacted. One of those impossibly long arms shot up, and it grabbed the branch it was sitting on, a branch thicker than my leg, and it shook it. It wasn't a little shake. It was a violent, powerful jerk. The whole branch shuddered, and leaves rained down around it. Then there was a loud crack, a sound so sharp and final it made me jump. The branch, the one it was holding, just snapped. It didn't break and fall. It snapped like a dry twig, and the end of it, a good 4-foot piece of solid oak, dropped and crashed through the lower branches before thudding into the dirt. The thing didn't even seem to notice. In the same fluid motion, it dropped from its perch. It didn't climb down, it just let go and landed on the ground below with a heavy, soft thump that I felt through the soles of my feet. It was even bigger standing up. It must have been 7, 8 feet tall at least, a massive dark shape blotting out the forest behind it. And then it moved. It didn't run away like a deer would, bounding off into the distance. It moved through the brush, and it did it in a way I've never seen anything move before or since. It didn't turn its back on us, not once. It kept its front towards us, those glowing eyes fixed on us, and it just retreated. It sidestepped. It ducked under branches. It moved backwards, all while staying facing us. It was unnaturally fast and agile, a blur of dark hair and impossible motion. It would take a few swift, long-legged steps, then grab a branch and swing itself to the side, its feet barely seeming to touch the ground. It was like watching water flow uphill. It was wrong. Everything about it was wrong. In a matter of seconds, maybe 5, it had melted back into the deep shadows of the woods. The last thing I saw was a flicker of movement, a deeper darkness shifting between the trees. And then it was gone. The woods were silent again. The buzzing of the flies back by Penny's body seemed deafening now. We stood there for a full minute, maybe more, just standing. I was trembling all over, a fine, uncontrollable shake that started in my knees and worked its way up to my chattering teeth. My grandpa finally lowered the rifle the rest of the way. He hadn't even had a chance to shoulder it. He just held it loosely in one hand. He turned around. His face was pale, his jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscles bunching. He looked at me, and his eyes were wide, with a raw, stark fear in them that scared me more than the creature itself. My grandpa was never scared. He was the one who killed the rattlesnakes in the yard with a shovel. He was the one who fixed everything, but he was scared now, terrified. He didn't say a word. He just put a hand on my shoulder, a firm, heavy weight, and turned me around, pointing me back down the trail towards home. We started walking. We didn't run, we just walked. Fast, our footsteps loud in the quiet. He kept his hand on my shoulder the whole way, and I was glad for it, because I felt like I might just fly apart into a million pieces otherwise. I kept looking back over my shoulder, expecting to see those glowing eyes following us from between the trees. But there was nothing, just the deepening dark. We didn't speak the entire way back. When we finally broke out of the tree line and saw the lights of the ranch house, it was like surfacing from a nightmare. My grandma was on the porch calling our names, her voice tight with worry. We must have been gone longer than we thought. Grandpa took his hand off my shoulder just before we reached the porch steps. He stopped me, leaning down so his face was close to mine. His breath smelled of coffee and tobacco. "Listen to me," he whispered, his voice rough and urgent. "You never saw anything in those woods today. You hear me? Not a damn thing. We found Penny. She was dead. Coyotes got her, and we came home. That's it. You don't ever tell anyone. Not your friends, not your mama, not even your grandma. You understand?" I just nodded, my throat too tight to speak. He searched my face for a second, then gave a short, sharp nod himself. "Good." We went inside. Grandma fussed over us, asking what took so long. Grandpa just said, "Horse was dead, coyotes," and went to put the rifle back in the rack. He washed his hands at the sink for a long time, scrubbing at them like they were covered in something I couldn't see. We ate dinner in near silence. I couldn't eat much. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those glowing eyes and that branch snapping. I never did tell anyone, not for years and years. My grandpa died back in 2007, and he never ever mentioned it again. Not once. We went back to walking in the woods, though he always brought the rifle after that, every single time. It's only now, as an adult, that I really think about it. I think about how he brought the rifle that day, specifically for the first time ever. I think about the way he said coyotes when we found Penny, like he was trying to convince himself. I think about the look in his eyes out there, a look that wasn't just shock, but a kind of grim, sick recognition. I think he knew. I think he'd seen it before. And I'll never know for sure, because he took that secret with him. All I'm left with is the memory of that thing in the trees, the sound of that branch breaking, and the cold, certain knowledge that there are things in the woods that we don't understand, things that watch us from the shadows, and sometimes they let us see them. Story 16. All right, so I've been sitting on this for a while, and I figure it's time to just put it out there. This is something that happened to me and my friend, and I still can't really wrap my head around it. We were down at our usual camping area, the one about 13 miles south of the Glen Avon Bridge on the Malala River in Oregon. We've been going there for years, mostly for quick check-ins because it's a spot we kind of maintain, just making sure no one's trashed the place or anything. That day, we had our 2 dogs with us, both big guys, a German Shepherd named Bear and a Rottweiler mix called Duke. They're usually loud and protective, which is why what happened later stuck with me so much. It was a typical overcast afternoon in late September, the kind where the air feels heavy and the light's already starting to fade, even though it's only around 3 o'clock. We'd parked the truck on this gravel pull-off that we always use, and the plan was just to walk the perimeter, maybe clear some fallen branches, and head back before dark. Nothing out of the ordinary. I remember the smell of damp earth and pine needles, and the river bubbling softly in the background. It's usually so peaceful there that it's almost like a reset button for my brain. We got out of the truck, and the dogs bounded ahead, sniffing around like they always do. They're both over 100 pounds each, so when they're excited, you can hear their paws thumping on the ground. We started walking, maybe 25 feet from the truck, just following this narrow path that loops around the campsite. I was carrying a small backpack with some water and a first aid kit, and my friend had a walking stick he'd picked up from a previous trip. The ground was soft from recent rain, so our boots sank in a little with each step. And I remember thinking how quiet it was, quieter than usual, like the birds had all decided to take the day off. Then, out of nowhere, this massive crashing sound erupted to our left. It wasn't like a tree falling or something normal. It was this violent thrashing noise, like something huge was plowing through the undergrowth. The brush shook so hard that leaves and twigs flew everywhere, and I could see the ferns and bushes whipping back and forth like they were in a storm. My heart just dropped into my stomach. I froze mid-step, and I could feel my friend do the same beside me. We both turned our heads toward the sound, and for a second, it was like time had stopped. The crashing kept going for what felt like forever, but was probably only a few seconds. Then the ground under my feet started to vibrate, not like a small tremor, but deep, resonant footsteps, heavy, rhythmic thuds that I could feel through the soles of my boots. It was 2 or 3 strides, I think, but each one was so powerful that it seemed to shake the whole area. The vibrations traveled up my legs, and I swear I could feel it in my bones. Whatever it was, it had to be enormous. The stride was long, like it was covering a lot of ground with each step, and the weight behind it was something I'd never felt before. It wasn't a bear or a deer. I've been around those enough to know the difference. This was heavier, more deliberate. The weirdest part was the dogs. Bear and Duke both stopped in their tracks, ears perked up, bodies tense, but they didn't bark. Not a single sound. They just stood there, staring in the direction of the noise, their tails stiff and low. That's what really got to me. They're usually so vocal, barking at squirrels or even the wind, but this time, they were dead silent. It was like they knew something was off, something dangerous, and they didn't want to attract attention. Duke let out this low growl, but it was so quiet I almost missed it. And then he backed up a step, pressing against my leg. Bear did the same, his fur standing on end. I've never seen them act like that. It was downright creepy. I remember my breath catching in my throat, and I could feel the sweat starting to bead on my forehead despite the cool air. My friend grabbed my arm, his fingers digging in, and he whispered, "What the hell was that?" But neither of us moved. We just stood there, listening, as the crashing faded into the distance, followed by this eerie silence. The forest went dead quiet again, like everything was holding its breath. I could hear my own heart pounding in my ears, and I kept expecting to see something. A shape, a shadow, anything. But there was nothing, just the shaking bushes and that lingering vibration in the ground. After what felt like minutes, we slowly started to back away toward the truck. My legs felt like jelly, and I had to force myself not to run because I didn't want to trigger anything. The dogs stayed close, their eyes still fixed on the spot where the sound came from. When we got to the truck, we practically threw ourselves inside and locked the doors. I remember my hands shaking so bad I could barely turn the key in the ignition. We just sat there for a while, not saying much, just staring out the windows, like we were waiting for something to emerge from the trees. That's when it all started to sink in, and my mind went back to all the other times we've had weird experiences in that area. Over the years, there've been nights where I've heard bipedal footsteps outside the tent. Heavy, 2-legged steps that don't sound like any animal I know. They'd pace around for a bit and then just stop, leaving me lying there with my heart racing. Once, I heard this whooping sound, kind of like a deep guttural call that echoed through the valley. It wasn't an owl or a coyote. It was something else, something that made the hair on my arms stand up. Another time, there was rock tapping, this rhythmic knocking on stones that seemed to come from different directions, like someone was communicating. And always, no matter what time of day, there's this persistent feeling of being watched. Even in broad daylight, I'll get this chill down my spine, like there's eyes on me from the woods. Sitting in the truck that day, all those memories came flooding back, and I realized that this wasn't just a one-off thing. This encounter, with the crashing and the footsteps, felt like the final piece of the puzzle. I've always tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a moose or a big bear. But moose don't move like that, and bears don't have that kind of stride. The vibrations in the ground were too deep, too heavy, and the dog's silence was a dead giveaway. They know when something's not right, and their reaction scared me more than the sound itself. We ended up driving out of there without finishing our check-in, and we haven't been back since. Every time I think about it, I get this knot in my stomach. I've told a few people, but most just shrug it off or make jokes about Bigfoot. But after years of this stuff, I can't dismiss it as coincidence anymore. There's too much evidence piling up, the sounds, the feelings that day, and it's left me with this lasting sense of unease. I don't know what it is, but I'm convinced that something, maybe Sasquatch, frequents that area, and whatever it is, it's big, it's smart, and it doesn't want to be seen. I still get chills when I remember those footsteps vibrating through my boots and how the forest went silent like it was respecting whatever passed through. It's something I'll never forget, and I doubt I'll ever have an explanation for it. Story 17. That particular night, I was walking home from my girlfriend's house. It was after 10 o'clock, and I remember because her mom had this rule about me being out too late. So I always tried to sneak away before it got too late. I took this shortcut across a big field that separated our neighborhoods. I'd been doing it for months, and it usually took me about 15 minutes to get home. The field was mostly tall grass, waist high in some spots, and there was this dense stand of trees to the right, kind of like a small woods that ran along the edge. Beyond that, it was just open land and a few houses scattered around. I'd been feeling uneasy for a couple of nights before this. The first night, I heard these heavy footfalls coming from the trees, like something big was moving parallel to me. It would stop when I stopped, start when I started, and it freaked me out so bad that I ran all the way home without looking back. The second night, it happened again, same thing, and I remember my stomach was in knots the whole time. But tonight I thought maybe I was just imagining things, or it was some animal, maybe a deer or something. I tried to brush it off because I didn't want to seem like a coward, especially since I was trying to impress my girlfriend by being brave. So there I was, walking through this field, and the air was cool for summer, with a slight breeze that made the grass sway. I could hear crickets chirping, and every now and then an owl would hoot from the trees. It was peaceful at first, but then I started hearing it again. Those footsteps, they were heavy like someone was stomping through underbrush, but not like a person. People don't walk that heavy unless they're carrying something, and this was rhythmic, almost matching my pace. I stopped for a second just to listen, and the footsteps stopped too. My heart started pounding in my chest, and I felt this cold sweat break out on my forehead. I started walking again slowly, and sure enough, the footsteps started up again, keeping pace with me from the trees. I tried to peer into the trees, but it was too dark. The moon was out, but it was only a sliver, so everything was shadows and shapes. I could make out the outline of the trees, but nothing moving. The footsteps were getting louder, though, like whatever it was getting closer. I picked up my pace, and the footsteps did too. It was like it was playing with me, matching my speed. I felt this knot in my stomach, and my hands were shaking. I kept telling myself it was just my imagination, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. Then, something changed. The footsteps weren't just paralleling me anymore. They started angling toward me, like they were on an intercept course. My breath caught in my throat, and I could feel this primal fear kicking in. I wanted to run, but I was frozen for a second, just listening. That's when I smelled it, this foul, musky odor that hit me like a wall. It was like rotting meat mixed with a wet dog that had been rolling in something dead. The smell was so strong it made my eyes water, and I gagged a little. I'd never smelled anything like it before, and it seemed to come from the direction of the footsteps. I could hear the footsteps getting closer, and now they were heavy and fast, like whatever it was closing in on me. I felt this presence, like something big was right there, just out of sight. It's hard to describe, but it was like the air got thicker, and I could feel this energy, this malevolence. My skin crawled, and every hair on my arm stood up. I panicked, I didn't think, I just bolted. I took off running as fast as I could, my legs pumping, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I could hear the footsteps behind me, heavy and relentless, and I didn't dare look back. I just focused on getting home. The field seemed to stretch on forever. I was stumbling over clumps of grass, my shoes slipping in the dirt, but I kept going. I could hear my own heart beating in my ears, and I was sweating so much that my shirt was sticking to my back. The smell was still there, clinging to the air, and it made me want to vomit. I remember thinking, this is it, I'm not going to make it. But I pushed harder. I could see the lights from my house in the distance, and I headed straight for them. My backyard had this motion sensor floodlight that my dad had installed because we'd had some raccoons getting into the trash. As I got closer, I sprinted toward it, hoping the light would scare whatever was following me away. I stumbled into the backyard, my chest heaving, and the floodlight clicked on, bathing everything in this bright, sudden light. I skidded to a stop, my knees feeling weak, and I turned around, half expecting to see nothing. But there it was. Standing by the clothesline pole, maybe 20 feet away, was this massive creature. It was huge, at least 7 feet tall, covered in dark brown hair that looked matted and shaggy. Its arms were long, hanging down past its knees, and it had a thick, powerful build. I couldn't see its face clearly because the light was behind me, casting shadows, but I could tell it was looking right at me. We just stared at each other. Time seemed to slow down. I counted in my head. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, and it felt like 15 or 20 seconds, but it might have been less. I was frozen, my body numb with fear. I could see its chest moving as it breathed, and it didn't make a sound. No growling, no movement, just this intense stare. My mind was racing. What was it? A bear. But bears don't stand upright like that, and they don't have arms that long. This thing was built like a man, but bigger, hairier, and more primal. I remembered stories I'd heard about Bigfoot, but I always thought they were just myths. Now standing there, facing it, I knew it was real. The smell was still faint in the air, that same rotten meat and wet dog odor, and it made my stomach churn. I don't know what broke the trance, maybe a noise from the house or my own fear overwhelming me, but I snapped out of it and ran for the back door. I didn't look back again. I fumbled with the knob, my hands shaking so bad I could barely turn it, and I burst inside, slamming the door shut and locking it. I leaned against the door, gasping for air, my whole body trembling. I could hear my parents in the other room watching TV, but I didn't say anything. I just stood there trying to calm down, but I couldn't. I peeked out the window, but the backyard was empty now, just the floodlight shining on the grass and the clothesline pole. I went to my room and sat on the bed, my mind replaying everything over and over. The footsteps, the smell, that thing staring at me. I didn't sleep much that night. Every little noise made me jump, and I kept expecting to see it outside my window. The next day, I was a wreck. I told my girlfriend about it, and she said her mom had heard something similar before. Some local legend called the Missouri Mo, which was supposed to be a Bigfoot-like creature, but I didn't need anyone to confirm it for me. I knew what I saw. After that, I never took that shortcut again. I started walking the long way home, even if it took twice as long. I avoided dark fields at night, and to this day, if I'm out after dark, I get this uneasy feeling, like I'm being watched. I've never seen it again, and part of me is glad, but part of me wonders what would have happened if I hadn't run. That memory is burned into my brain clear as day, and sometimes when I'm alone, I still get chills thinking about it. I don't know what it was, and I probably never will, but I know it was real, and I know I was lucky to get away. Story 18. All right, so this is something I've never really talked about much, and even now, typing it out feels weird, because part of me still can't believe it happened. But it did, and I need to get it off my chest. This was back in 1974, and I was driving south on Highway 77 near Blue Springs, Nebraska. It was one of those clear afternoons in late summer, where the sky is just this deep blue, and the sun is warm but not too hot. I remember because I had the window down a bit, and the air smelled like cut grass and dust from the fields. I was heading home after visiting my cousin in Lincoln, and honestly, I was just lost in my own thoughts, not paying much attention to anything except the road ahead. I've always been an outdoorsy guy, hunted, fished, spent a lot of time in the woods around here, so I'm not someone who spooks easily. But what happened that day, it changed everything for me. I was driving along, maybe doing about 55 miles an hour, just cruising, you know. The road there has these gentle curves, and as I came around this left-hand bend, something caught my eye up ahead. At first I thought it was a deer or maybe a big dog, but then it stepped out from the ditch on the west side of the road, and my brain just froze. This thing was massive, like nothing I'd ever seen. It was upright, standing on two legs, and it must have been 7 or 8 feet tall. Easy. Its body was covered in this shaggy, blackish-brown hair that looked almost matted, like it had been rolling in mud or something. The arms were long, way longer than a person's, and it had this barrel-chested build that made it look powerful, like it could rip a tree out of the ground if it wanted to. But the face, that's what got me. It wasn't as hairy as the rest of it, but it wasn't human either. The features were kind of flat, and I couldn't make out eyes or a mouth clearly, but I got this sense of intelligence, like it knew what it was doing. It all happened so fast. 1 second, it was stepping out of the ditch, and the next, it was crossing the highway. And I mean crossing. It took maybe 3 strides, big smooth strides, and it was already on the other side. The road isn't wide, just 2 lanes, but the way it moved, it was effortless, like it was gliding. I swear I've never seen anything move that quickly on 2 legs. My foot just came off the gas automatically. I didn't even think about it. The car slowed down, and I felt this cold sweat break out on my forehead. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat, and my hands were gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. As I was slowing down, I noticed another car coming from the opposite direction. It was a beat-up old sedan, kind of tan-colored, and it slowed down too. We both kind of rolled to a stop, not completely, but enough that we were just sitting there in the middle of the road for a second. I rolled down my window and the other driver did the same. He was a guy maybe in his 40s, with a beard and a worn-out hat, and he looked just as shocked as I felt. He leaned out and shouted, "Did you see that?" And I just nodded, my mouth too dry to say anything. We exchanged this look, one of those moments where you know you're both thinking the same thing, like, what the hell was that? He said something like, "I've never seen anything like it," and I managed to croak out, "Me neither." Then, without another word, we both rolled up our windows and drove off. There was no discussion about stopping to investigate or anything. It was like we both knew we needed to get out of there. I kept driving, but my mind was racing. I couldn't stop thinking about the creature. The way it moved was so fluid, almost graceful, but in a way that felt wrong because nothing that big should be able to move that fast. Its strides were long and confident, like it had done this 1,000 times before, and the sound, or lack of it. There was no heavy footfall or anything. It was quiet, just this swish of air, and maybe a faint rustle as it disappeared into the ditch on the east side. It headed toward a stand of trees, and for a second I thought I saw the branches move. But I might have been imagining it because my heart was still hammering in my chest. The rest of the drive home was a blur. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see it following me, but there was nothing. The road was empty behind me, and the other car had sped off in the opposite direction. I remember my hands were shaking so bad I had to pull over a few miles down the road just to calm down. I sat there on the shoulder, engine idling, and tried to process what I'd seen. My mind kept going back to the details. The shaggy hair, the way its arms swung as it moved, the sheer size of it. I've seen bears and moose out in the wild, but this was different. It was built like a person, but not more primal, more powerful. I thought about stopping and going back, but something in my gut told me not to. It was this deep, instinctual fear, like when you're in the woods and you get that feeling you're being watched. I've had that happen before, but never this intense. My skin was crawling, and I had this urge to lock the doors, even though I was already in the car. I ended up driving the rest of the way home without stopping, and when I got there, I just sat in the driveway for a while, staring at nothing. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I'd see it crossing the road again. I kept replaying it in my head. trying to make sense of it. Was it a bear walking on its hind legs? But bears don't move like that. They're clumsy on 2 feet. And this thing was smooth, almost elegant. And the height? No bear I've ever seen is that tall. Plus the face wasn't right. It was too humanoid, but not human. I've heard stories about Bigfoot over the years, but I always dismissed them as tall tales or misidentifications. But after that day, I couldn't deny it anymore. I saw what I saw, and so did that other driver. We both saw the same thing. And that mutual confirmation made it real in a way that nothing else could. What really stuck with me was the speed. It crossed that 2-lane highway in what felt like a heartbeat. I've timed it in my head since then. From the ditch on one side to the other, it couldn't have taken more than a couple of seconds. And the way it didn't even look at us. It just moved, like it had somewhere to be. That made it even scarier because it wasn't aggressive or threatening in an obvious way, but there was this underlying power that felt dangerous, like if it had wanted to. It could have easily reached my car and done something, but it didn't. It just kept going. I've spent a lot of time outdoors since then, and I've never seen anything like it again. But that one encounter was enough to make me a believer. I don't know what it was, but I'm convinced it was Bigfoot or something similar. And honestly, I hope those creatures are left alone, protected rather than hunted or harmed. Nebraska has a lot of wild spaces. And if they're out there, they deserve to live in peace. But that day, it stuck with me for decades. I still get chills thinking about it, especially when I'm driving on lonely roads at dusk. Sometimes I'll catch a movement out of the corner of my eye, and for a split second, my heart will jump, thinking it's happening again. But it never does. It was just that one clear afternoon in 1974, and I've never been able to explain it.